The wave of condensed rot hit me like a physical blow, a whiplash of ammonia and something far, far worse, a stench that tasted like decay and despair. My stomach heaved before I even saw him. Then I did. FoodJohn, or what was left of him, slumped in the bathtub, his head lolled back, eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. But it wasn't his vacant gaze that cemented the horror, it was what was missing. From his chest down, his body was an obscene ruin. Legs gone, dissolved. Not even bone fragments remaining. His pelvis was a gaping chasm, an impossible void where flesh and bone should have been, like something had burrowed through him from the inside out. His skin, what little remained below the chest, was stained an impossible, glistening black, as if he'd been marinating in crude oil. And then I saw them, tiny, dried husks clinging to the ceramic near the drain, and crawling up the sides of the tub, small, segmented black things, no more than 4 inches long, resembling miniature, grotesque centipedes, brittle and dark as charred kindling. My breath hitched, a dry, ragged cough escaping my throat. The world tilted on its axis, a sick, swirling kaleidoscope of nausea and dawning comprehension. This was the secret ingredient. This was the unique flavor. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth would crack. The memory of that succulent, otherworldly taste, the white meat I'd raved about, the dark, rich broth. It all curdled in my gut, hot and acrid. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, what I had eaten. That horrifying revelation, that final stomach-turning understanding, was the grotesque culmination of weeks of unsettling oddities, of a hunger I should have ignored, and a curious, morbid pull I'd learned too late was a fatal flaw. It all started with an email, a digital breadcrumb leading to a place that shouldn't have existed, a restaurant named Taste of China. I hate shrimp. No, hate isn't strong enough. Viscerally repulsed is closer to the mark. Not just shrimp, but most crustaceans. Honestly, crabs maybe, if they're dismembered beyond recognition and slathered in butter. It started young, like most of my hang-ups, at some all-you-can-eat Chinese buffet that probably deserved to be shut down by the health department. I was a kid, happily shoveling fried rice and mystery meat when I stumbled upon a vat of unpeeled shrimp. And there they were, legions of tiny, armored abominations, their cold, unfeeling eyes staring back at me, their delicate, segmented legs twitching, or at least seeming to twitch, in the lukewarm broth. It wasn't just a part of them, a clean tail or a breaded nugget. It was all of them. The sheer, unadulterated wrongness of eating something that was still so recognizably an entire creature hit me like a brick. The thought, even now, makes the hairs on my arms stand up. Later, my older sister, a sadist in training, sealed the deal with lobster. "You know, those are basically giant cockroaches, right?" she'd said, all innocence, as I wrestled with a steaming claw. "They're cousins." And as I looked closer, holding that bright red claw, I saw it, the long antennae, the segmented body, and worst of all, the legs. Those tiny jointed legs, so horrifyingly similar to the scurrying nightmare I'd once seen in a greasy spoon kitchen. From then on, crustaceans and arthropods blurred into one category in my mind. Things that scuttle in the dark and should not be eaten. Of course, I'm Leo Vance, world-weary and cynical, sure, but not immune to the siren song of a good meal. I've seen too much to let a little disgust stand in the way of flavor. My life, what little there is of it, has been spent on the road, taking whatever transient, no questions asked jobs come my way. Truck driver, warehouse night shift, security guard for places no one else would touch. Anything to keep moving, to keep the past a blurry rearview mirror. My worn leather jacket is practically a second skin, scarred by countless cheap diners and forgotten roadside motels. My old analog wristwatch, a relic from a saner time, is a constant companion. Its familiar weight on my wrist a nervous tick, a way to ground myself when the world starts to spin, which it always seems to do. I'm running from something, always have been, something vague and terrible that I can't quite grasp, something that haunts my dreams and whispers at the edges of my waking thoughts. But I'm also a creature of habit, and part of that habit is trying every new restaurant that pops up in whatever temporary town I'm stuck in. So, when an email landed in my inbox on August 3rd, bypassing the junk folder as if it held some divine right, I opened it. It was from a new restaurant opening down the street. The name, Taste of China. My cynical antenna twitched. I live near a historically Chinese neighborhood, so Taste of Hunan and Taste of Chengdu were old favorites. But this felt different. The email spoke of a soft launch, an exclusive event. Odd. Very odd. I occasionally reviewed places on Yelp, but I was hardly a local food critic. Why me? How did they even get my email? I ran a hand over my stubble, a low growl rumbling in my chest. Another invitation to the abyss. Leo, you never learn. Still, the attached pictures were compelling, dishes that shimmered with an unnatural vibrancy. Unlike the usual bland photos, typical of new, generic Asian joints, my curiosity, that wretched, regrettable spark of something resembling a conscience, won out. I decided to go. The restaurant itself was the first red flag, a beacon of wrongness waving in the culinary landscape. It was nothing like any Chinese restaurant I'd ever seen. Forget the loud, brightly lit spaces, the large communal tables, the clatter of woks. This place was dark, almost somber. The decor screamed modern Japanese fusion, all sleek lines, polished dark wood, and muted lighting. It was narrow too, unnervingly so. The aisles between the booths felt barely wide enough for a single person to squeeze through, an oppressive, almost claustrophobic design choice. And the booths themselves were cramped, small steel coffins on wheels, designed, it seemed, to keep you isolated, perhaps to discourage any communal dining or conversation. My observational skills, honed by years of sniffing out trouble, kicked into overdrive. This wasn't just different, it was wrong, but I was already there, the morbid curiosity having locked me in place. Just eat, Leo, then get out. No need to make a scene. The menu was another puzzle, not the usual tome with 100 variations of fried rice and spring rolls. Just two sections, appetizers with 3 choices, entrees with 3 more, 6 items total. For a soft launch, it seemed strangely complete, finished, as if this was exactly what they wanted you to order. My eyes settled on the seafood stew. The pictures had shown a beautiful, dark red dish, glistening with tempting pieces of white flesh. It was what had initially drawn me in. Despite my ingrained aversion, I ordered it, along with a couple of appetizers that turned out to be less dumplings and buns and more dense, vaguely spherical dough balls. I picked at them, my suspicion growing. But then the stew arrived. It came in a large, heavy pot, still bubbling, radiating heat and an aroma that defied description. It wasn't Chinese. It wasn't Pakistani. It was something else entirely. And it was, unequivocally, the most extraordinary thing I had ever tasted. The shrimp and lobster were good, surprisingly so, but the real star, the undisputed king of this culinary enigma, was the fish, that succulent, pure white meat, flaking apart with the touch of my spoon, was unlike anything I had ever put in my mouth. It transcended any flavor profile, any cuisine. It was savory in a way I hadn't known food could be, deep and rich, almost umami, but with a subtle sweetness, a complex, almost addictive quality that made my brain hum. Even the sauce, dark and glossy, was excellent, an unholy symphony of tastes. I'd eaten in Michelin star restaurants, Places that charged more for a single bite than I made in a week, and none of them came close to this. The only minor complaint, a whisper of unease at the back of my mind, was the shells. Either some shrimp or lobster shells had been added to the stew, but they were a deep, unsettling dark color, almost black, and had long, twisting spines that I'd never seen on any crustacean. Inside, a gooey, black material seeped into the broth, a constant, slimy reminder that I was consuming something that had once been alive. I pushed those thoughts down. It's just exotic. Leo, you're being paranoid. Still, the image of those eyes from the buffet and my sister's cruel comparison flickered. But the taste drowned out the apprehension. It was, without a doubt, the best meal I had ever eaten. Bar none. Finished. A strange, contented lethargy settling over me. I paid the check. The waiter, a tall, gaunt man with pasty white skin, Irish, Eastern European, had moved with an odd, stilted grace. His voice had been even stranger, a flat, almost mechanical delivery, like a text-to-speech program struggling with human enunciation. I asked him where the restroom was. He gestured, his arm moving with an unnatural stiffness, a puppet on invisible strings. "The door right at the end of the hall," he intoned. I remember that precise phrase. The corridor was narrow, stretching far longer than the exterior of the building suggested it should. As I walked, I passed other patrons, their faces slack with a blissful, almost vacant contentment. It was eerie. Happy diners. Leo. Nothing to see here. Just a really good chef. I reached what I thought was the end of the hall, a door that seemed to beckon in the dim light. I pushed it open, and then I was in hell. The smell hit first, a rank, pungent odor that sliced through the lingering aroma of the stew, something metallic and fishy and profoundly wrong. Then I saw the tubs. The entire wall was lined with them, industrial-size, gleaming steel, like something out of a morgue or a very specific, very disturbing abattoir. One sat open on a counter, brimming with water, and in it, a mass of something large and wriggling, dark forms undulating beneath the surface. For a split second, my brain tried to rationalize it. Live ingredients, maybe some kind of exotic fish. Then a man, as pale as the waiter, with skin so devoid of color it seemed almost translucent, reached into the tub. He pulled and pulled and pulled. What emerged was a horror that clawed at the foundations of my sanity. Not a mass of creatures, but a single, impossibly long organism. Its body was chitinous, black and glossy, shimmering wetly under the harsh fluorescent lights. Like polished obsidian, it was segmented, each section connected by what looked like impossibly sharp, multi-jointed legs, hundreds of them, writhing in the air, a nightmare of motion. It was a centipede, but no centipede I had ever seen, or even imagined, could be this size. Wider than a lobster, its segments kept coming, unfolding from the tub, longer and longer, 20 feet. It had to be at least 20 feet long, still uncoiling. The man, a butcher's grim efficiency in his movements, pressed the creature's head onto a cutting board. It let out a high-pitched, almost mechanical shriek, a sound that scraped against my eardrums, echoing the metallic smell now coating my tongue. His cleaver came down, a sickening crunch that severed the scream mid-wail. The legs continued to twitch for a moment, a frantic, desperate dance, before finally falling still. Next to him, on the counter, sat a pot, a large, heavy pot, the same dark, rich broth, the same pot that had held my dinner. The world blurred. Bile surged up my throat, scalding and bitter. My stomach contracted violently. The white meat, the spines, the gooey black material. I turned on my heel, a frantic scramble for escape. I realized my mistake then, the waiter's stilted words echoing, "The door on the right at the end of the hall." Not the door right at the end of the hall. This accidental detour had revealed a truth I never wanted to know. I burst into the unmarked bathroom across the hall, slamming the door behind me. I barely made it to the toilet before emptying the contents of my stomach. The glorious, unique taste of the stew now, a burning, putrid memory. My chest heaved, sweat prickled my forehead, and a cold, clammy dread settled deep in my bones. I went home after that. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely sign the credit card slip. Before I left, a morbid urge, a need to confirm, seized me. I asked the waiter, the pale, stilted man, what the seafood stew had been made of. He gave me a puzzled, almost blank look. "Shrimp, lobster, and fish," he replied, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. Just like the menu said, a lie, delivered with the mechanical precision of a clockwork doll. The next few days were a blur of revulsion and desperate, obsessive research. My apartment, usually a haven of quiet anonymity, felt like a cage. I searched for aquatic centipede, for giant centipede, for anything that resembled what I had seen. Nothing. Not with legs like those. Not that size. My mind replayed the scene, the writhing mass, the sickening crunch, the sheer, impossible length of the creature. I had to know. A few days later, I drove by the restaurant again, hoping to see the pale worker, hoping for anything. That would make sense, but it was gone. The storefront was empty, stripped bare, no sign, no furniture, just a gaping, vacant maw where a nightmare had briefly taken root. The memory burrowed into my skull, a parasitic thought. I kept looking, searching online for Taste of China, finding dozens of generic Chinese restaurants, all with menus full of predictable lo mein and General Tso's. None shared the dark, modern decor, the impossibly narrow aisles, the cramped booths. Nothing Chinese about it, save the name. Every staff member I'd seen was white, except for one who might have been Desi. Even the dumplings and buns had been off, more like crude approximations of European pierogi than delicate Asian fare. The name, and I realized, was just a veil, a flimsy, transparent lie. About a week later, a related post popped up. A self-styled TikTok influencer named FoodJohn, someone I recognized from my own casual Yelp perusals, had apparently gone to the same restaurant on the same day as me. He'd been denied filming access. He ranted, but his follow-up post was effusive, raving about the incredible food. He swore he'd been told to wait to post. He was right about the food. Damn his enthusiastic soul. I scrolled through his profile, a dark thought forming in my mind, a reluctant pull of that cursed conscience. He doesn't know. He might go back. I sent him a message telling him I'd been there too. He replied almost instantly, practically insisting we meet. Someone else who experienced it firsthand, he'd typed, the words buzzing with an innocent excitement that twisted my gut. We made plans to meet in 2 weeks. I should have made time sooner. I should have told him everything. A few days later, he sent another message, just an address, his home. I presumed it wasn't far, a 20-minute bus ride. As the bus rumbled through the quiet streets, I debated for the 1,000th time whether to tell him what I'd seen. Ignorance is bliss. I thought, a bitter, cynical mantra. Let him have his dreams of culinary perfection, even if it's a lie. I got off the bus, the worn leather of my jacket chafing slightly against my shoulders, and walked up the path. The house was ordinary, unremarkable. I knocked, no answer. I tried texting, calling, nothing. A cold knot tightened in my stomach, the kind of intuitive dread that had saved my life more times than I cared to count. My hand went to my old wristwatch, tracing the cool glass. a futile attempt to ground myself. Something was wrong, very wrong. Despite every instinct screaming at me to turn and run, my cursed conscience, that wretched anchor, dragged me forward. I tried the doorknob. It turned. The door creaked open, exhaling a foul, thick stench that made my eyes water. It was the smell of rot, of death, unmistakable and overwhelming, a sickeningly sweet miasma that permeated the very air. My throat constricted. Maybe I'm mistaken, I thought, a desperate, pathetic hope. Maybe it's just a dead animal. But the sheer pungency of it, the way it filled my lungs and coated my mouth, defied that comforting lie. I considered calling the police, but that familiar, morbid curiosity, the one that always led me into trouble, tugged me onward. The living room was unremarkable, average, if a little messy, but the stench, oh God, the stench. It wasn't just in the air. It seeped into the furniture, clung to the curtains, pressed in on me like a physical weight. I could practically taste it, a metallic, cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. I moved into the bedroom, the smell weakening slightly there. Nothing of note, just a surprisingly powerful computer and a bed that seemed disproportionately large for the room. My watch-checking tick went into overdrive, my thumb rubbing against the crown, a futile attempt at reassurance. The kitchen was next. Cabinets almost bare, save for stacks of empty water bottles. I opened the fridge. A new aroma, potent and fishy, blasted out, mingling with the pervasive rot. It was crammed, not just with fish, but with every conceivable type of seafood: shrimp, lobster, prawns, scallops, sea urchin, sea cucumber, snails, octopus, squid, and stranger things I couldn't even name, all packed in tight, glimmering with an unnatural freshness. I slammed the door shut, the cloying smell of death engulfing me once more. I wandered, the morbid curiosity a painful throb behind my eyes, looking for what I could only assume was FoodJohn's body. As I acclimated to the overwhelming stench, I realized it grew stronger, much stronger, near a locked door on the far side of the living room. This is it. Vance, this is where you call the cops. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was a moth to a flame, drawn by the horrifying certainty of what lay beyond that door. It was one of those cheap bathroom doors with a simple pinhole lock. My eyes scanned the room, desperate, and finally landed on a paperclip on his messy desk. My fingers, trembling slightly, fumbled with the thin wire. It clicked. The door swung open, revealing a scene of absolute chaos. The bathroom was a war zone. Counters cleared, flung to the floor. The tiles were strewn with random objects: empty water bottles, crumpled paper towels, and toilet paper, all saturated with a dark, almost black liquid. It looked like diluted crude oil. I picked my way through the soggy, dark mess, my breath catching in my throat, the smell intensifying with every step. My eyes, darting, landed on the shower. I reached out, my hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before yanking the curtain aside. And that's when the condensed rot, the metallic tang, the overwhelming ammonia hit me, a punch to the gut that sent my breakfast rocketing up my throat. FoodJohn was there, slumped, his head lolled back, eyes staring sightlessly. But it wasn't his vacant gaze that cemented the horror. It was what was missing. From his chest down, his body was an obscene ruin, legs gone, dissolved, not even bone fragments remaining. His pelvis was a gaping chasm, an impossible void where flesh and bone should have been, like something had burrowed through him from the inside out. His skin, what little remained below the chest, was stained an impossible, glistening black, as if he'd been marinating in crude oil. The toilet, I noticed, too late, was also full of the same black liquid. I gagged, leaning over the thankfully empty sink, heaving until my diaphragm ached. until there was nothing left but dry, bitter bile. I stumbled back to the tub, wiping my mouth with a trembling hand. FoodJohn's face was frozen in a rictus of terror, his eyes streaked with that same black liquid, making him look like someone who'd cried while wearing too much mascara. A grim, unexpected wave of sadness washed over me. He was a fellow food lover, an innocent, and how terrifyingly easily. It could have been me in that tub, my own eyes streaked with that vile, unholy fluid. This was not the time for levity, though. I forced myself to examine the tub. The drain was ringed with the black liquid, thick and sludgy, like coffee grounds. More of it clung to the corners and sides, a viscous sediment. And then I saw them. Near the drain, a small, dried-up black centipede, roughly 4 inches long, just like the one I'd seen in the restaurant kitchen, only smaller. Then 2 more, clinging to the side closest to me, another in the far corner. My mind screamed. These were the shells. These were the spines. These were the gooey black material. I had eaten them. I had eaten this. That was the moment I finally called the police. Not because I was brave or rational, but because I had reached the end of my rope. There was nothing more to see, nothing more to understand. Only the cold, horrifying certainty. The police arrived. 2 uniforms, a young one looking green around the gills, and an older, cynical one who had seen it all. They asked questions, their faces etched with a confusion that mirrored my own. The younger cop stumbled out of the bathroom, pale and shaken. When I started to explain the restaurant, the centipedes, the impossible flavor, the older cop shot his partner a look that said, "This guy's crazy, but not crazy enough to be a suspect." After a quick trip to the station, a rushed statement, and a palpable sense of wanting to be rid of me, they let me go. It's been a few months now. For the first couple of weeks, the thought of seafood, even a simple fish stick, made me nauseous. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, tasting that sweet, otherworldly flavor, seeing those writhing legs, FoodJohn's ruined body. But the memory, like all trauma, begins to dull, to calcify. The craving, that perverse, dangerous curiosity, has started to return. I'm back to eating crustaceans occasionally, though I still eye them with a deep, primal suspicion. And every day I find myself looking up Taste of China online, hoping for a new post, a new clue, a new victim. I tell myself it's to warn unknowing patrons, to be the conscience I sometimes regret having. But deep down, in the most cynical, self-deprecating corner of my mind, I wonder if it's not just a desperate, terrible hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, I can try that delicious, unholy seafood stew again. Total character count, 9,788 characters. The tang of copper and ozone clung to my tongue, thick and cloying, a taste I knew intimately, one that always presaged the kind of hell ordinary men only saw in their worst nightmares. Blood, not my own, slicked my worn leather jacket, a grotesque abstract art painted by another family's demise. The wail of sirens, growing closer, wasn't a comfort. It was the soundtrack to the end of a world, a chorus of disbelief that would soon be met with the cold, hard proof of what I just witnessed. My hands, still trembling, wanted to reach for the familiar, comforting weight of my old analog watch, but they were clenched, useless fists, sticky and warm. Plug your ears if you hear that jingle, lock your doors, and for God's sake, don't let your children near the truck. The words were a silent scream in my skull, a litany of rules carved into my very being by the last few minutes of impossible horror. But those rules, I knew, were born from the kind of knowledge that came at too high a price I just watched someone else pay in full. It had begun, as these things always did, with a deceptive whisper of normalcy, a sun-drenched afternoon that felt too perfect to be true. I'd been working the graveyard shift at the warehouse on the outskirts of Elmwood for the past month, running down some inventory discrepancies. Tonight was my last night before moving on. Another town, another forgotten job, another futile attempt to outrun the shadow that clung to me like a second skin. I was just taking a detour through a quiet, upper-middle-class suburb, looking for a shortcut back to the main highway. The air was thick with the lazy hum of summer, the kind of quiet that makes you suspicious when you've seen too much. Manicured lawns, two-car garages, the gentle scent of freshly cut grass. It was a picture of suburban bliss, a scene straight out of a damn greeting card. My hand instinctively went to the cool steel of my old wristwatch, tracing the worn edges. 4:30. Time for the kids to be out playing, for the illusion of safety to be at its most potent. That's when the jingle started. Familiar, insidious. The saccharine, tinny melody of an ice cream truck, warbling from unseen speakers. It was that specific tune, the one everyone knows, ingrained in the collective subconscious of childhood. A pleasant, nostalgic sound for anyone else. But for me, it felt like a discordant note in a symphony of dread. My blood ran cold, the kind of chill that sinks past the bone and settles in the marrow. I had no idea why, not then. Just a primal, animalistic certainty that something was profoundly wrong. My grip tightened on the steering wheel of my beat-up sedan, knuckles white. Every hair on my arm stood on end. It was the same prickle I'd felt as a child, standing on the edge of the woods behind our house, a sense of an unseen presence, a deep-seated wrongness that had always preceded, well, everything. The jingle grew louder, rounding the corner, and then I saw it, a boxy, white truck, emblazoned with the words Mr. Frosty's Ice Cream in cheerful, melting letters. It was pristine, almost unnaturally so, glowing in the afternoon sun. No rust, no dents, no peeling paint. Too perfect. Even from a distance, the vehicle looked less like something that had traversed countless streets and more like a prop, freshly pulled from a freezer box. And the jingle, it was too loud, too clear, assaulting the senses with its cloying cheerfulness. It didn't just play, it piped, a relentless beckoning siren song that seemed to vibrate in the very air, burrowing into the soft gray matter of anyone within earshot. I watched, a morbid fascination taking hold. As a young boy, maybe 8 or 9, with a mop of blonde hair and eyes the color of a summer sky, bounced excitedly towards it. His father, a man in a polo shirt with a friendly, unassuming air, followed a few paces behind, a fond smile playing on his lips. They were a picture of innocent domesticity, the kind of scene I usually went out of my way to avoid, lest it stir up the bitter ashes of my own buried past. But now it was a tableau of impending doom, lit by the cruel, golden light of the late afternoon. My cynical brain, the one that usually told me to floor it and get out, was screaming at me. Just go. Vance, don't get involved. You know how this ends. But my other half, the reluctant conscience I cursed daily, dug its heels in. It was the same damn impulse that had kept me rooted in that dilapidated house in Sycamore Grove as a kid, when every instinct shrieked to run, to save myself. It was the same stubborn, stupid guilt that made me stop for hitchhikers, or look into the dark places I should have avoided. So, I cut the engine, the sudden silence inside my car amplifying the relentless jingle outside. I watched, my jaw tight, as the truck lumbered to a halt beside the boy, 25 feet away, maybe 30, close enough to see the details, far enough to feel utterly helpless. The father walked up, a relaxed posture, his hands in his pockets. The boy peered up at the menu board, a picture of innocent anticipation. The driver's side window was tinted, impenetrable, no glint of glass, no hint of a face within, just an inky void. And then the serving window scraped open, a sound that shouldn't have been audible from my distance, but it was. a sickening metallic shriek, like abused metal tearing on rusty rollers. The sound vibrated in my teeth, a fingernail drawn down a chalkboard, infinitely amplified. And through that newly opened gap, I saw it. Or rather, I didn't see it. The inside of the truck was drenched in shadow, a black so profound it seemed to devour the brilliant afternoon sunlight, mocking its very existence. It was like looking into a wound in reality, a tear in the fabric of the world where light ceased to exist. A chill, bone-deep and absolute, bit into the air, radiating from the truck, chasing away the summer warmth. My stomach clenched. That familiar cold dread coiled in my gut. This wasn't right. This wasn't just a chill. It was the raw, unnatural cold that came before something truly awful. My mind, a cynical catalog of horrors, flashed to the things I'd glimpsed in the dark corners of the world, the whispers of entities that bled through the veil. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "Run, you idiot! Run!" But I was frozen, my gaze locked on the boy, on the father, on the gaping maw of the truck. The boy, Kyle, sensing something was wrong, that preternatural sixth sense children sometimes possess, turned, his bright blue eyes, wide and innocent, fixed on his father, then on the truck, a tiny flicker of confusion playing on his face. He didn't have time to process it. One moment, he was standing there, vibrant and alive. The next, a grotesque, impossible mass of spider legs exploded from the inky darkness of the serving window. Hairy, jointed feelers, a writhing, seething tangle of nightmare, shot out, coiling around the boy. He was sucked in, not pulled, but vacuumed, like shrink wrap through a powerful industrial cleaner. A sickening whoomp of air escaped his lungs, a sound devoid of a scream, as he snapped backward like a rag doll. His head hit the top of the window frame with a wet crack, lolling unnaturally to the side. And then he was gone, swallowed by the impossible darkness within the truck. A strangled sound tore from my own throat, a voiceless wail of horror and futile rage. My foot slammed on the gas pedal, the tires spitting gravel as my sedan lurched forward. I barely registered the father's guttural scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that would echo in my mind for weeks. My vehicle fishtailed, and I cursed, fighting the wheel. The ice cream truck, meanwhile, began to move, the cheerful jingle still mocking the horror it had just unleashed. I jammed the car into park, leaping out before it had fully stopped, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. My worn leather jacket flapped behind me as I sprinted, fueled by a desperate, idiotic surge of that cursed conscience. What was I going to do? I had no plan, just a suicidal need to do something. I reached the truck as it pulled away, my vision blurred with adrenaline and the sickening knowledge of what I was witnessing. I slammed my fist against the side, a dull thud against the cold metal, then grabbed the edge of the serving window, pulling myself up, peering into the impossible void that had consumed the child. The interior of the truck was a spatial anomaly, a gaping, cavernous space that defied all logic. It was not a truck, it was a portal, a vast, echoing abattoir, stretching into an unseen distance. The air inside was thick with the stench of something ancient and metallic, the coppery tang of fresh blood mingling with the cloying sweetness of stale sugar and a faint, indescribable musk of decay. My eyes, ever observant, scanned the horrific panorama. Dilapidated cattle chutes, slick with a glistening, reddish-brown residue, snaked through the darkness, leading to a sprawling plant floor textured with stained, grimy linoleum. It was a factory, a killing floor, designed with an efficient, horrifying purpose. This wasn't some forgotten relic of industry. It was a living, breathing nightmare. And the livestock? Oh God, the livestock. Hundreds of them. Children, small, pale shapes. Their movements sluggish, listless. their faces slack and devoid of expression. Their eyes were glazed, empty, like broken dolls. They shuffled along the chutes, caked in their own filth, their small forms dwarfed by the hulking figures that moved among them, figures in blood-stained aprons, their faces obscured by USGI cold weather masks, the kind designed for Arctic conditions. But here, they hid something far colder than ice. They moved with a chilling efficiency, wielding curved knives, opening throats with wet, tearing sounds. There were no screams. That was the worst part. The silence was absolute, broken only by the weak shuffle of small feet, the syrupy slap of blood hitting the floor, and the occasional soft thud of a lifeless body. The dead were hoisted, ankle up, onto a conveyor system that hummed softly in the oppressive darkness. Like at a dry cleaner's, they zipped off through a darkened portal, into the unknown. A hot trail of blood still sprayed from their severed necks, misting the air with a fine crimson spray. I felt a wave of nausea so profound it threatened to buckle my knees. My stomach roiled, a hot rush of vomit threatening to climb my throat. This was it. This was the source, the wellspring of the cosmic dread that had haunted me since Sycamore Grove. The same pervasive evil, operating with a cold, terrifying indifference. It was a familiar flavor of horror, but scaled up, infinitely more ravenous. This wasn't just a monster, it was an industry, a system. As the truck continued to pull away, my grip slipping, a pale, small hand reached out from the gloom. My heart leaped into my throat. It was Kyle, his head pitched at a sickening angle, his eyes dead, vacant, but still, something. A spark, a tiny flicker of recognition, buried beneath the horror. And then, he spoke. A single word, whispered in a voice I would never hear again, a voice stripped of its childish innocence, tinged with a chilling finality. Run! Then, with a sudden, impossible force, he slammed the serving window shut. Just as the gap closed, I saw the massive spider legs encircle him from behind, intertwining like grotesque fingers. They covered his mouth, his eyes, tearing him backward, deeper into the dark, sending him toward the slaughter line. The truck growled up the street, its cheerful jingle echoing, mocking. It turned the corner, the sound fading, and disappeared from view, carrying off the son of a stranger, a child I had tried and failed to save, just like I had failed my own family all those years ago. I stumbled back, landing hard on the asphalt, the sickening crunch of gravel under my spine. The father of the boy was already on his knees, a raw, primal howl tearing from his throat, a sound that mirrored the one I'd heard from my own mother so long ago. He looked at me, his eyes wide and vacant, the gaze of a man whose world had just been ripped apart. I didn't say anything. What could I say? Your son was taken to a meat locker run by multi-limbed horrors? The words would stick in my throat. Useless. The next few hours were a blur of flashing blue and red lights, the guttural mumble of police radios, and the flat, unblinking stares of detectives in cheap suits. The father, a man named Michael, was inconsolable. His wife, Jessica, arriving later, her scream of anguish tearing through the quiet suburban street like a physical wound. She collapsed, wailing for her son, while their daughter, Maya, perhaps 8, clung to her mother's leg, her face a mask of bewildered terror. I stayed in the background, a silent, grim observer. They asked me what I saw. I lied, told them of Mr. Frosty's ice cream truck, exactly as it was. Took him. No spider legs, no impossible interior, no slaughterhouse. They would have locked me in a padded cell. Or worse, accused me of involvement. My word carried no credence. I knew that. My life on the road, my lack of roots, my detached demeanor, it all screamed suspect. They put out a statewide APB. They found nothing. Of course, They found nothing. The night that followed was a black void of despair. I stayed, compelled by that damn conscience, by the echoing scream of the mother. I sat in my car, parked down the street, watching their house, a silent sentinel. Michael and Jessica didn't sleep. Her face was puffy, her eyes red-rimmed and vacant. Maya, the younger twin, was smart, too smart for her age. She understood the weight of the silence, the crushing grief that had descended upon their home. She had put herself to bed without fuss, a small, somber ghost in her pink PJ onesie. I was numb, my body cold. A sick lie, I thought, giving them any hope. I knew what I had seen, deep down, in the furthest pit of my stomach. I knew their son, like all those children, was gone, dead. Blindly shuffled up the murder chute to those hulking things in bloody aprons. Around midnight, a small figure appeared in the doorway of their home, silhouetted against the dim light within. Maya, clutching her pink blanket, her eyes wide but not with simple fear. Something else, recognition. A chill snaked up my spine. This wasn't normal grief. This was the prelude to something I knew all too well. Michael, hollow-eyed, looked at his wife. "What?" he mumbled, barely audible. "Jessica," her voice thick with snot and tears, blew into a tissue. "Kyle's out there. We should be looking for him, trying to find that truck." She cut him an accusing glare, the blame a palpable thing between them. It wasn't her fault. It wasn't his. It was the truck's. Then Maya spoke, her voice a thin, reedy whisper that cut through the night, slicing through the remnants of false hope. "He's home, Daddy," she said. "Kyle's home." My blood ran cold. The kind of cold that steals your breath, that leaves your skin clammy and your mind screaming, "No, not this, not again." My hand, trembling, went to my watch. The minute hand seemed frozen. I watched, my heart thundering as Michael and Jessica rushed to the back door. The porch light flickered on, painting the scene in a sickly yellow glow. The thing that came through their back door was not their son. It looked like Kyle. It walked like him, a shambling, mud-caked gait. But it wasn't him, not truly. Its pale skin was streaked with grime, but it was the eyes that froze me, cold and dead. Not the warm, innocent blue puddles they had been, but two icy marbles that seemed to freeze the air around them. There was a knowing, malevolent smile twisting its face, a parody of childish innocence. Jessica sobbed, wrapping the mud-streaked imitation of her son in an embrace. It didn't hug back. Those two cold eyes were pinned on Michael, then on me, a flicker of something ancient and terrible in their depths, as if acknowledging my presence, my curse. "Why'd you do it, Daddy?" The voice was Kyle's, but it was wrong. Too flat, too hollow. They led it into the living room, a family walking into a nightmare. I could feel Maya's body tense up against her mother's, a small, desperate tremor. She knew. She saw it. She knows something bad is about to happen. "What?" Jessica asked, her voice cracking with confusion. "Why'd you try to kill me? Try to kill me, huh, Daddy? Why? I thought you loved me. Dad, I thought you..." Its head reared back impossibly far on its neck, a sickening crackle of cartilage and bone. Its mouth curved into a dark, perfect O, growing wider, impossibly wide. A throaty, gurgling sound emanated from its throat. Its eyes rolled back into their sockets, showing only the whites, like a pair of blind, unseeing orbs. Jessica looked at Michael, her eyes wide with dawning horror, then back at the thing that was supposed to be her son. She started backing up, a slow, terrified shuffle. Michael, too, was frozen, his face ashen. They retreated into the living room, the Kyle thing bearing down on them, forcing them back. Maya had started to sob, clutching her pink blanket to her face, her warm, salty tears soaking her mother's shirt. The O of Kyle's mouth continued to expand, drawing further and further as it spoke again. Only this time, its lips didn't move. And the voice, deeper, warped, like the words of a demon from the mouth of the possessed, came hissing out of its throat, a wet, guttural sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. "Why, Dad? Why'd you fucking do it? You like killing little kids. Dad? Want to kill Maya? Want to see her pigtails wrapped in brain? Stop!" Michael's voice was a weak, thin rasp, lost in the echoing horror. The thing chuckled, a wet, slithering sound, as Kyle's mouth continued pulling back, impossibly wide. Its lips were coated in a glistening bile, thick and viscous. Its teeth were brown and jagged, like broken splinters of ancient bone. Jessica's head snapped between the monstrosity that wore her son's face and her husband, her face a mask of shattered disbelief. Her legs hit the couch, and she crumpled onto the cushion with a surprised gasp. It was lost in the hoarse, demonic voice that had hijacked her son's mouth. "Want to bash her little head in? Hammer it until it crumples and all those little girl thoughts and feelings come spilling out?" The corners of the Kyle thing's mouth tore. Rivulets of blood, dark and sluggish, sledded down its throat, staining the front of its mud-streaked shirt. Its mouth continued to pull back, like its head was splitting up on a hinge, bone and tendons snapping and crackling with sickening wet sounds. The lower half of its face was soaked in its own grotesque blood. "Make him stop, Dad," Maya moaned, her voice muffled by her blanket, a plea for a world that no longer existed. Michael couldn't speak. His voice was lost, swallowed by the terror. His Adam's apple bobbed convulsively, but no sound escaped. The Kyle thing's mouth split wider, wider, the sound of tearing flesh and grinding bone sickeningly loud in the confined space. Its throat distended and undulated, like there was a knot of fingers trying to claw their way out. "Want to be a butcher, Dad?" The voice within the Kyle thing chuckled, a wet, slithering sound that scraped at the raw nerves of my soul. Hack through gristle and vein and the stretch of pink flesh connecting tiny heads to tiny bodies. Feel the warm rush of blood over your hands. Feel your knife scrape bone as they drain. Its words were a poison, meant to break the man, to unravel his sanity. Want to watch the light bleed from their eyes as their life bleeds from their throat? Want to, Dad? Want to? Then, with a final horrific tearing sound, the Kyle thing's head tore back, its cheeks ripping, its mouth forced open in an awful, hellish grin. And the mass of hairy, jointed spider legs exploded from its throat, writhing and snapping into the living room, a sudden, grotesque blooming of pure horror. Jessica started to scream, a high-pitched, piercing shriek of absolute terror. One of the spider legs, thick and segmented, lashed out, batting her across the face with a wet thwack. Her head snapped around, a sickening crackle echoing, and she pitched forward, landing on the couch with the boneless weight of a sack of grain. That galvanized Michael. He let out a wordless roar, galvanized by a primal, desperate surge of fatherly instinct. He flung Maya onto the couch and lurched for the rack of fireplace tools. The spider legs crackled and snapped, flickering around like a net of tendrils from the Kyle thing's broken mouth. Maya was shrieking, a raw sound of pure, childlike terror. The spider legs lunged for her, shooting forward, long and dark, aiming for her delicate, small form. Michael tore the poker free of the fire rack, a heavy, blunted piece of wrought iron. He whipped around, using his forward momentum, bringing the heavy instrument down with as much force as he could muster. A desperate, valiant swing against the impossible. Only he missed. Oh, God, how he missed. Maya, in her childlike terror, had instinctively lunged away from the spider thing trying to kill her. She had lunged right into the arc of her father's swing. The barbed end of the poker hit the center of her skull, not the monster's, and went burrowing into her brain. I heard bones snap like glass, a sickening, wet crack. I saw the poker ease into the spongy folds of her mind. She fell, like a puppet whose strings had been cut, landing face down with a sickening thud. A tiny, strangled sob escaped her lips. Her small hand clenched into a microscopic fist against the patterned rug. And then she died. The Kyle thing began to roar with laughter, a wet, gurgling sound of triumph that was utterly inhuman. It turned on Michael, its spider legs flickering and pulsing, snapping in all directions like 10 of those inflatable dealership tube men, obscenely alive. "You like killing kids, Dad? You like—" Then, a surprised gasp. The spider legs snapped erect, like soldiers at attention, as the animation drained from the Kyle thing's face. Michael, broken by what he had just done, had wrenched the poker free of his daughter's broken mind and, with a final, desperate surge of fury, plunged it into the Kyle thing's left eye. Its ocean blue eyeball deflated, a thin run of viscous, yellow pus running down one cheek. Then the tendril sucked back into its mouth with a final, wet gurgle, and the Kyle thing pitched forward, landing on the floor with a heavy, final thud, as dead as the rest of his family. I stood there on the street, misted in their children's blood, their screams still echoing in my ears. The sight of the slaughtered children inside the truck burned into my retinas. The sirens were closer now, a banshee wail. My hands, still clenched into useless fists, began to tremble uncontrollably. This was my life. This was the curse. To witness, to be drawn in, to be tainted by the horrors that stalked the edges of reality. My own past, the Sycamore Grove incident, felt less like a distant memory and more like a fresh wound, reopened by the agony of these strangers. The ice cream truck, a beacon of childhood joy, had become another testament to the universe's indifference, to the hungry things that preyed on the innocent. I was broken. A man ruined by a summer day, by a haunting jingle, by a glimpse into a darkness I would never truly escape. I'm sure my name would be bolded in the paper, conjoined to some variation of family annihilator or witness to tragedy. But it wasn't me, not directly. I bore the blame. God, how I did. The blame of a man cursed to witness, cursed to carry the knowledge, cursed to be forever pulled towards the very horrors he tried to outrun, and then, forever alone, left to write his warnings. If your kids ask for ice cream, buy them a tub of the store-bought stuff. It's just as good. My only hope, a flimsy, desperate prayer, was that someone, somewhere, would listen and survive. Character count excluding instructions. 9,167 characters. The world narrowed to the sound of claws scraping tile, a wet, guttural shriek that was once the laugh I loved. My vision swam, red-tinged, as a shadow descended, heavy and smelling of copper and something else. Something metallic and rotten. This wasn't Sarah. This was a nightmare wearing her skin, and it was coming for me. My last, ragged gasp of air caught in my throat, choked by the terror coiling in my gut like a venomous snake, before I hit the floor, scrambling backward, a primal scream dying in my chest. That wasn't the first time I'd seen her, or what she'd become, but it was the first time I understood the abyss we were staring into. It had begun, subtly, insidiously, months earlier, on a morning that smelled of frying eggs and false security. A morning when I was still foolish enough to believe in a normal life. I used to think I had a handle on normalcy. It was a flimsy thing, a paper-thin veneer over the chaos of the world. But it was my normalcy. And Sarah, my Sarah, she was the very foundation of it. We'd met years ago when the world was still a chaotic, vibrant thing instead of the muted, dangerous hum it is now. Back then, I was younger, less cynical, less prone to checking my old analog wristwatch every 5 minutes as a nervous tick. We just clicked. It wasn't some grand, cinematic romance. It was a slow, steady burn. built on shared silences and the kind of easy laughter that doesn't need an audience. She saw me, really saw me, back when being seen felt like a comfort, not a vulnerability. She was my anchor, a constant amidst the transient jobs and the low thrum of anxiety that had always been a quiet hum in my chest, a legacy of a past I preferred not to prod. She cooked, actual meals that filled our small apartment with the scent of garlic and comfort. I, the less culinarily inclined, stuck to baked goods, cookies, cupcakes, anything that could be measured precisely and didn't require browning. We cleaned together, argued over the right way to fold laundry, her way was always right, and filled our nights with the same obscure movies, the same classic rock, the same dog-eared books. We liked physical contact, the brush of a hand, a quiet hug, but also valued our space, our quiet moments. We were a team, a proper, functioning team, or so I thought. Looking back, the signs were there, subtle as a whisper on a crowded street, easily dismissed, especially by someone who preferred not to look too closely at the cracks. It started about a year ago, a quiet erosion, a slow seeping of something cold into the warmth we'd built. I was in the kitchen, wrestling with a skillet and a stubborn batch of scrambled eggs. The smell of butter and protein thick in the air, a comforting, mundane scent. Sarah was on the sofa, bathed in the blue glow of her phone, her thumb scrolling with a hypnotic rhythm. TikTok, of course, the latest digital siren call. Hey Gersonim, you want these scrambled, or you feeling more like sunny side up this morning? I asked, my voice cutting through the gentle sizzle of the eggs. No answer, just the soft click of her phone screen. I shrugged, figuring she was just absorbed, lost in whatever digital void she was staring into. I did it too, sometimes, zoned out, the world narrowing to a glowing rectangle. Normal, or what passed for it. I focused on the eggs, flipping them with practiced ease, the spatula scraping against the hot metal. The quiet stretched, a little longer than usual. A thought, faint as a moth's wings, brushed against my mind. She's usually quick to answer. She likes to talk about food. I dismissed it. Paranoia. Leo. Just paranoia. I walked over to the living room, spatula still in hand, a little more slowly than I needed to. Hey, did you hear me? What you watching? I tried for casual, for lighthearted, but there was a faint, insistent tremor of unease beneath it. She looked up, a smile spreading across her face. Too wide, maybe? Or was I just imagining things? The smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Those beautiful, green eyes. She just said, "Tick-tock," her voice a little flat, almost robotic. My internal alarm bells, usually a symphony, were still just a single, tentative chime. It was unsettling, but not enough to call the fire department. Not yet. Eggs, scrambled or sunny side up? I repeated, a little more firmly. Sunny side, she mumbled, already looking back at the phone. I went back to the kitchen, a faint frown etching itself between my brows. We ate in a silence that felt heavier than usual, punctuated only by the clinking of forks against ceramic and the faint, tinny sounds of whatever was playing on her phone. She barely touched her food. I remember watching her, a strange sense of unfamiliarity creeping in. It was like she was a stranger performing a familiar routine. The movements a little off, the energy wrong. Then, out of nowhere, she mentioned vacation. Philippines, she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. I blinked, surprised. Where? The Philippines. Wow. We can always take a week off work. You know, been meaning to get away. A genuine smile broke through my unease. A trip. Maybe this was what she needed. A change of scenery, a break from the routine. I was still stupidly optimistic back then. She didn't answer. Her head was down, her gaze fixed on the table, as if the grain of the wood held some profound secret. The silence stretched, long and uncomfortable. It felt like walking on thin ice. Every breath a careful calculation. I felt a knot of concern tighten in my stomach. What was going on? She'd brought it up. Now she was retreating. This wasn't Sarah. Sarah would have been buzzing with ideas, pulling up photos, talking about beaches and food. Then, just as suddenly as she'd gone quiet, she sprang up, almost knocking her chair over, and said, "I want to go to the Philippines." Her voice was a little too loud, a little too bright. I stayed silent for a whole minute, my mind reeling. The abruptness, the shift in her demeanor. It was like watching a switch flip. It was deeply unsettling. But then, the idea of a trip, of escaping, of recapturing what we had, took hold. I forced a smile. "Okay," I said, a little breathlessly. "Okay, let's do it." She smiled then. A small, cute, almost shy smile. The old Sarah, my Sarah. It melted something cold in my chest. I remembered covering my mouth, a blush rising to my cheeks. I was still completely, hopelessly and stupidly in love with her. That smile, that fleeting glimpse of the woman I knew, became a talisman. For the rest of the month, as I pored over travel sites, booked tickets, bought us new clothes, and saved every spare dollar for souvenirs, that smile was all I saw. It fueled me, made me ignore the growing distance, the increasingly blank looks, the subtle strangeness that had begun to cling to her like a faint scent. The day of the trip arrived. I was up before the sun, the nervous energy of travel thrumming through my veins. The apartment was still, bathed in the pre-dawn gloom. I went to the car, started the engine, letting it warm up in the chill morning air, then headed back inside. Half an hour until we needed to leave for the airport, an hour until boarding, plenty of time if everything went smoothly, which, in my life, it rarely did. I went into our bedroom, empty. The sheets were still rumpled on her side, but she wasn't there. My stomach clenched. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice tight. Silence. I walked to the bathroom door, a familiar dread beginning to coil. "You in there?" "Yes." Her voice muffled but clear. I exhaled, a ragged sound. "Okay, fine, just a last-minute bathroom trip. Nothing to worry about." Only when, as the minutes ticked by, it became something to worry about. 5 minutes passed. 10, 15. The clock on the wall, a cheap digital thing that mocked my analog watch, glared at me. 25 minutes until we had to leave. We were going to miss the flight. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at my skin. I started to pace, hands running through my hair, a low moan escaping my lips. My chest tightened, the familiar vice of anxiety squeezing the air from my lungs. I imagined the wasted money, the lost vacation, the frustration building to an unbearable peak. I walked back to the bathroom door, knuckles white as I rapped on it, trying to keep my voice even, calm. "Sarah, please, we have to go. We're going to miss the flight. Please hurry." The door opened. She stepped out, fully dressed, but her expression was wrong. Her brow was furrowed, a faint frown playing on her lips, as if Yash were the one inconveniencing her. My jaw tightened. The blood, money, and time I'd invested, the hope I'd clung to, flared into a hot, furious anger. My reluctant conscience was buried under a pile of righteous indignation. "Are you serious?" I snapped, my voice cracking. "What the hell? Why aren't you ready? I spent so much money on this trip, this vacation you wanted. Get in the car. I don't give a damn if you're not ready. We're leaving. Now." Her eyes, those beautiful green eyes I adored, narrowed. Then, slowly, deliberately, she rolled them at me. My anger, already scalding, turned molten. "Did you just roll your eyes? At me? After everything? I spent over $1,000 on this. Sarah, $1,000. Do you have any idea how much I scraped and saved? How much I looked forward to this trip for you? Get in the goddamn car. Now! I don't want to go, she mumbled, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. I scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. You're joking, no, right? This is some kind of sick joke? She just stared at me, her expression hardening into something cold, something I didn't recognize. My anger, irrational and ugly, was still burning. I knew it. I knew I was being a monumental jerk. I had never, not once, yelled at her like this in our entire relationship. But the thought of all that money, all that hope, all that effort, vanishing because she didn't want to go, was more than I could bear. My internal monologue, usually so cynical, was screaming with self-recrimination even as the words flew out. You're being an ass, Leo, a complete, total ass. We made it to the airport with 5 minutes to spare, a frantic, breathless dash through the echoing terminal. I mumbled an apology, my pride still stinging, her face still set in that unfamiliar frown. The flight was a blur of cramped seats and tense silence. The vacation itself was normal, blandly, terrifyingly normal. Like a stage play where the actors were slightly off kilter, their lines delivered without conviction. We ate, we swam, we visited tourist traps. We even managed a few strange smiles for photos. It was like a dream, hazy and forgettable. And by the time we were back home, the airport incident, the strange quiet, the eye roll, it had all faded into the background, dismissed as pre-travel jitters in an overdue argument. Nothing to worry about, I told myself. A blip, a minor tremor. I was wrong. Months later, the dreams started, not nightmares. At first, just dreams. Persistent, recurring. I couldn't remember the details when I woke up. Only the heavy, oppressive feeling, the faint chill that clung to my skin, and the overwhelming knowledge that I'd been dreaming of her. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart hammering, and turn to look at Sarah, curled beside me, soft and warm and seemingly oblivious. And then, seeing her there, safe and comfortable, I'd drift back to sleep, dismissing the dreams as stress or bad pizza. Then, one morning, I woke up, and the dream wasn't a hazy memory. It was vivid, terrifyingly so. In the dream, she was running around me, laughing, like a little kid, the old Sarah, full of energy and mischief. I was smiling, laughing too, basking in her uncomplicated joy. And then, she stumbled, not a graceful fall, but a sickening collapse. Her laughter morphed into a choked sob, tears streaming down her face, and her eyes, her beautiful green eyes. They weren't green anymore. They turned red, a startling, arterial red, then faded to a sickly, milky white, like the eyes of something dead or something unborn. Then, she vomited, a thick, viscous stream of blood, dark as crude oil, staining the pristine white floor of the dreamscape. The metallic smell, even in the dream, was sickeningly real. I woke with a jolt, gasping, the taste of bile in my mouth, the lingering scent of copper in my nostrils. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure adrenaline. My body was slick with cold sweat, the sheets tangled around my legs. I rolled over. The image of those eyes burned into my retina. Red, pale, dead. I looked at Sarah, lying beside me, still asleep. But the memory of the dream, the horrifying transformation, made my breath catch. Her eyes were closed, thank God. But what if? My anxiety, a beast I'd learned to keep caged, was clawing its way out. I reached out a trembling hand, hesitated, then gripped her shoulder. My knuckles were white. "Sarah," I whispered, shaking her gently. "Sarah, wake up." No response. The panic spiked, a hot, searing wave washing over me. "Sarah," I cried, shaking her harder, tears stinging my own eyes. My voice was a frantic, desperate plea. Her eyes fluttered open. Green. Still green. My beautiful Sarah. Relief, sudden and overwhelming, crashed over me, pulling the air from my lungs. The adrenaline, which had been pumping through me like a fire hose, suddenly drained away, leaving me weak and trembling. I broke down, sobbing, clinging to her, burying my face in her shoulder. "Oh, God, Sarah," I choked out, tears soaking her pajama top. "I had such a terrible dream. You were..." I couldn't even finish the sentence. She didn't try to reassure me, didn't say, "It's just a dream, baby." She just looked at me, her green eyes unnervingly steady, and said, in a soft, flat voice, "You saw what you weren't meant to see." The word, so calm, so devoid of comfort, hung in the air like a cold mist. My remaining adrenaline had come and gone too fast, leaving me utterly spent. I was too tired to even process it, too tired to argue, too tired to question. I just laid my head back down, pulled her closer, and cried a bit more. The dream still a vivid, horrifying painting behind my eyelids, before finally, mercifully, falling back into a troubled sleep. When I woke again, the first thing I registered was a faint, metallic smell, like old coins or a butcher shop. My eyes, still gritty from sleep and tears, opened slowly. The morning light was filtering through the blinds, casting stripes across the room. And there, on the side of the bed Sarah always slept on, was a dark, viscous puddle. My sleep-addled brain, ever eager for the mundane, immediately supplied an explanation. "Oh, period. Just bled through." It was gross, but normal. Nothing to panic about. Then, I wiped my eyes, clearing the last vestiges of sleep, and focused. The puddle wasn't small. It was a dark, almost black mass, sprawling across the sheet, soaking into the mattress. It was the size of a fat cat, curled up. My breath caught, my stomach lurched. This wasn't normal. This was too much. Far, far too much. The metallic smell intensified, making my nostrils flare. It was blood, thick, dark, arterial blood. A rising tide of panic, icy and relentless, surged through me. My breathing hitched, shallow and quick, bordering on hyperventilation. I scrambled out of bed, my feet hitting the cold floor, the horror of the sight momentarily paralyzing me. "Sarah?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. My eyes darted around the room, empty. I grabbed my phone, fingers fumbling, and started to dial 911, my heart a frantic hummingbird in my chest. No. Wait. What am I going to tell them? My wife bled out in her sleep? That's insane. And where is she? I crept out of the bedroom, phone clutched in my trembling hand, the emergency number half dialed. The air in the hallway felt heavy, thick with an unseen presence. Every shadow seemed to deepen. Every mundane object seemed to twist into something sinister. I found her in the living room, or at what I thought was her. She was on the floor, on all fours. Her back was arched at an unnatural angle, spine twisted, limbs crooked and bent like broken branches. Her head was down, obscured by a curtain of tangled hair. A faint, wet sound, like something chewing on gristle, filled the silence. My blood ran cold. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering to the hardwood floor. Forgotten. "Sarah," I whimpered, a raw, terrified sound. She lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were still green, but wide, unfocused, and streaming with tears. Not tears of sadness, but of effort, of strain. Her jaw was slack, mouth slightly agape, and I could see something dark and wet on her teeth, glistening in the faint light. A primal shriek tore from my throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. I had one last, desperate gasp of air before my knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the floor, scrambling backward, hands clamped over my mouth, trying to stifle the whimpers, the terror, the bile rising in my throat. She looked at me, those tear-filled, green eyes, and then, with a horrifying, wet grunt, she pounced. The world exploded into a blur of motion, a flurry of limbs and a sickening, animalistic growl. I reacted on pure instinct, a survival mechanism honed by years of running from things I didn't understand. I threw myself backward, scrambling to my feet, my legs burning with a sudden surge of adrenaline. I bolted towards the bathroom, the only room with a lock, the only place I could think of. I can't recall the specifics of that desperate sprint, only the searing pain in my lungs, the frantic pounding of my heart against my ribs, and the terrifying knowledge that something was right behind me, something that wanted to tear me apart. I slammed the bathroom door shut behind me, the cheap wood rattling in its frame, and fumbled for the lock. The click, when it finally engaged, was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I leaned against the door, gasping, body trembling uncontrollably, the cold ceramic of the tiles seeping into my skin. My breath hitched, ragged and shallow. My eyes darted to the mirror. My reflection was a wild-eyed stranger, hair disheveled, face pale and streaked with sweat and tears. I barely recognized myself. Outside the door, the banging started. Not just a simple knock, but a heavy, deliberate thud, as if something substantial was throwing itself against the wood. The sounds were punctuated by a wet, guttural scraping, a tearing sound. And then, the worst of it, her voice. "I love you," it rasped, thick with a liquid gurgle. But it wasn't Sarah's voice. Not really. It was Sarah's voice. Yes, but distorted, stretched, warped into something monstrous, something beyond human. The words were a mockery, a chilling parody of affection, laced with something hungry and predatory. "I love you." Each syllable was a fresh blade twisting in my gut. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I finally managed to connect to 911. "Help me," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper, thick with terror. My wife." I couldn't form the words. What was I supposed to say? My wife turned into a monster and is trying to kill me? They'd lock me up. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the noises stopped, the banging ceased, the wet scraping faded, the distorted whisper died. An eerie, profound silence descended, broken only by the frantic hammering of my own heart against my ribs, and a sound, a quiet, steady drip, drip, drip. Blood. I didn't need to see it to know. I could feel it, an oppressive weight in the air, a metallic tang on my tongue. And then, a new sound, a knock, from the front door. Loud, authoritative. The police, finally. Relief, pure and unadulterated, washed over me, so potent it almost made me weak. But the memory of what was outside the bathroom door, of the silence, of the dripping, was a cold counterpoint. No way in hell was I going out that door. Not yet. Not until I knew it was safe. Lucky for me, our bathroom had a small, frosted window. I fumbled with the latch, forcing it open. The cool morning air, a welcome shock to my fevered skin. I stuck my head out, ignoring the chill. "Over here," I yelled, my voice hoarse from disuse. "In the bathroom, over here." Soon, I heard the heavy boots inside the apartment, the murmur of male voices, a cautious knock on the bathroom door. "Police, are you all right in there, sir?" "Yes, just be careful. Please." My voice trembled, betraying the fragile calm I was trying to maintain. The door burst open. Two officer kind of faces grim, guns drawn, scanned the small room. Their eyes widened as they took in my disheveled state. the fear etched onto my face. One of them, a burly man with kind eyes, holstered his weapon and took my arm gently. "All right, sir, let's get you out of here." As they escorted me out, the scene hit me like a physical blow. The walls, they were covered, not just splattered, but coated in thick, dark blood. Streaks and smears marred the once clean surfaces, like some abstract, horrifying art piece. My gaze fell to the hallway floor, a long, dark trail. A macabre breadcrumb path led from the living room to the bathroom door. And then I looked down at myself. My jeans, my legs, they were soaked and cut. Deep, jagged slashes, as if something had clawed at me, torn at my flesh. My brain, blessedly, had blocked out the pain, the physical assault. But now, as I registered the sight, an immense, bone-shattering pain erupted. It was like 1,000 tiny needles piercing my flesh, followed by a dull, throbbing ache that consumed my entire body. My legs buckled. I barely heard the officer's exclamation as I collapsed, darkness beginning to creep in at the edges of my vision. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights, sterile smells, and hushed voices. Nurses, doctors, questions I couldn't answer. They stitched my wounds, ran tests, gave me IVs. They called my parents, my family, people I hadn't seen in years, people who had always kept a polite distance. Ever since, my whole family, it turned out, had disowned me. They wanted nothing to do with it. With me, mental breakdown, I heard one of the nurses whisper. Grief-induced psychosis. They didn't understand. They couldn't. Not one person I thought even remotely cared showed up. I was alone. Utterly, completely, terrifyingly alone. It wasn't surprising, just confirming. Confirmed what I already suspected. The world was a lonely, dangerous place, and I was on my own. It just reinforced the notion that I was fundamentally an anomaly. A magnet for the kind of horrors most people could just dismiss as urban legends or mental illness. Once I recovered enough to stand, enough to pull on clothes that felt too big for my newly gaunt frame, I got my meager belongings from what was left of our apartment. The place was a biohazard, a scene out of a horror movie. My worn leather jacket, miraculously unsullied, was the only thing that felt familiar, a comforting weight on my shoulders. My go bag was still by the door, packed and ready, as always. A premonition, perhaps. I left the country. The U.S. felt too small, too filled with ghosts. Europe, somewhere far. I picked the UK because it was the first place that came to mind. A gray, damp island, a place where anonymity was a virtue. The next 6 months were a fog of grief, paranoia, and a creeping, insidious madness. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every unexpected sound made me jump. I'd wake up in cold sweats, convinced Sarah was there, or what she'd become. My old analog wristwatch, a grounding presence, became a constant fidget toy, my thumb rubbing the worn metal as if to erase the memories. I wandered the streets, a ghost among the living, haunted by the memory of her sweet, kind presence, the way she used to laugh, the gentle touch of her hand. I kept replaying that morning, the fight, my stubbornness, my anger. Could I have saved her? If I hadn't forced her on that trip, would she still be my Sarah? The guilt was a constant companion, a heavy cloak I couldn't shed. After about half a year, the loneliness and the questions became unbearable. I needed answers. I couldn't just live with this. I went online, risking exposure, and started searching. Wife changed. Bizarre transformation. Blood sickness. I sifted through conspiracy theories, medical journals, and obscure forums. Days blurred into nights. Then, I found it. A mention, buried deep in a thread about parasitic entities and psychological manipulation. The Nero-virus. I reached out to the person who'd mentioned it. They were strange, cautious, but they talked. And what they told me, what I read, twisted the knife of guilt deeper into my gut. The Nero-virus, they explained, a parasitic entity, not a biological virus, not in the traditional sense. It operated on a psychological level first. It would whisper to you, a small, insistent voice in your head, urging you to travel to a specific place, always out of your home country. It would trick you into believing it was a sign, a premonition of good fortune, a necessary pilgrimage. The virus's home was in a different environment, a place where its influence was strongest. Once you were there, once your body was adapting to a new climate, new air, new pathogens, the virus took advantage. It began its slow, insidious takeover. Physical changes, behavioral shifts, a complete loss of self. The host became a puppet, their body a vehicle for the entity's will. Some people, the lucky few, could resist. They'd feel the urge, the whispers, but they'd realize, even at the last minute, that it was a trick. They'd fight the urge to travel, they'd stay home, they'd survive. My blood ran cold. The Philippines trip, her idea, my stubborn refusal to back down, my anger, my frustration, my selfish desire not to lose money. I had forced her to go. I had pushed her into the gaping maw of that thing. I was the one who had condemned her. "I don't want to go," she had said. The words so flat, so devoid of emotion. She was resisting, even then. My Sarah, fighting the thing in her head. And I had screamed at her. I had forced her. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she explain? But then, the virus probably wouldn't let her. It was subtle, insidious, and my reaction, my outburst. Maybe it had scared her into silence. She had suffered because of me. My fatal flaw, my reluctant conscience, was now a gaping, bleeding wound. Every day since, the guilt has been a heavy stone in my gut, a constant, crushing reminder of my failure. It's been about a year since it happened. A year of running, a year of looking over my shoulder, a year of the world becoming a bleaker, more dangerous place. I feel sorry. Sorry for Sarah. Sorry for myself. Sorry for the ghost of the man I used to be. And now, I'm just Leo, the weary wanderer, the haunted everyman, always moving, always looking, always ready to run. Because some things you realize you can never outrun. You just keep adding new layers to the trauma. My knuckles screamed, a symphony of bone and gristle, as Marcus's head bounced off the cold, hard steps. The gurgling sound from his throat was a lullaby to the madness that had consumed me. A madness I thought was fueled by love, by fear, by a twisted sense of obligation. My own blood, hot and metallic, mixed with his on my fists, painting a gruesome portrait on the scuffed linoleum. The metallic tang of fear and something acrid, almost like ozone, filled the air. I kept hitting, a frantic, desperate rhythm, my mind a broken record of her voice, her threats, her impossibly demanding gaze. "Is this what you want, Lindsay?" I roared, my voice raw, cracking. But as the first teacher burst into the stairwell, eyes wide with horror, I saw only empty space where Lindsay should have been. Just me, Marcus's broken body, the blood, and the echoes of a voice that was never real. It's funny how a single wrong turn, a single stupid decision, can redefine your entire universe. Looking back, it had all started months earlier, with the screech of tires and the sickening crunch of metal, a sound that would forever be etched into the raw, exposed nerve of my memory. A sound that, even now, years later, could still drag me back to the shredded upholstery, the smell of burning oil, and the impossible silence that followed. I've seen more than my share of impossible things since then. The cold, desolate road where a dead man whispered. The haunted house where the very walls bled secrets. The eyes of a creature that wore another man's face. But nothing. Not even the nightmare of heaven as a farm for cosmic predators. Quite scraped at the primal fear, like the memory of that night, when I was just a kid, believing I was in control. My analog wristwatch, a relic I still wear, was smashed then, its hands frozen at midnight, a permanent monument to where my life splintered. Most teens do stupid things. I was no exception. My particular brand of idiocy, however, came with a lifetime warranty of regret. It manifested as 8 beers, a borrowed '69 Camaro, and a misplaced sense of immortality. My dad loved that car more than he loved me. Probably. He should never have put that much faith in an 18-year-old idiot. Especially not that idiot. That version of me, who thought he could outrun physics and the consequences of a few too many Coors Lights. We were on our way back from junior prom. Lindsay beside me, her dress, a shimmering cascade of rose gold, still smelling faintly of cheap corsage and desperation. One moment, we were laughing, the radio spitting out some forgotten pop anthem. The next, the world exploded into a kaleidoscope of metal, glass, and a sickening, gut-wrenching spin. The black leather of my jacket, new then, but now a second skin of worn comfort, offered no protection. The crash itself is still a blur, a series of flash frames burned into the back of my eyelids. The shriek of tires, the impossible momentum, the gut-lurching impact that slammed me against the seatbelt, the windshield shattering into a spiderweb of death. Then, the silence. A silence so profound it felt like the world had simply stopped breathing. I remember the sickly sweet smell of coolant, the acrid bite of deployed airbags, and the horrifying wet warmth spreading across Lindsay's rose gold dress. Blood. So much blood. Hers, I realized, or maybe mine. The sight of it, blooming across the delicate fabric, was too much. The world swam, then vanished. Fear, or maybe just blood loss, dragged me into a void. I often wonder now if that was the moment it started, the fracturing, the moment the seams of my reality began to fray, leaving me open to whatever horrors were waiting in the wings. The sirens tore through the void first, a wailing banshee song, then the lights, strobing and blinding, even through my closed eyelids. The frantic, shouting voices of police and paramedics, distant and distorted, like trying to listen through a foot of water. They tore us from the mangled wreckage of what had been my father's pride and joy, tossed us into separate ambulances like discarded luggage. The last thing I remembered, before the blessed darkness claimed me again, was the cold, sterile mask over my nose and mouth, the instant wave of chemical-induced exhaustion washing over me. A familiar sensation now, the forced oblivion, a temporary reprieve from the relentless haunting. Waking up was a shock. The hospital room was sterile, silent, and empty. A dim fluorescent light hummed above my head, casting long, distorted shadows, and the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of a heart rate monitor was the only sign of life. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. Where was Lindsay, my parents, nurses? Why was I alone? I tried to sit up, a monumental effort that left me gasping, every muscle screaming in protest. And then, a horrific, impossible sensation. My left leg from the knee down was simply gone. A phantom limb, an echo of thought as I tried to flex a foot that no longer existed. The reality of it was a punch to the gut, a visceral understanding of how utterly, irrevocably broken I was. Just as the terror threatened to consume me whole, a nurse burst through the door, her face a mask of practiced calm. She hurried to my side, her voice soothing, telling me to relax, that I'd been in a coma for 3 days. 3 days. 3 days of nothingness. I knew what death felt like then. The sensation of absence, of being on the precipice of something vast and unforgiving. The realization of how close I'd come, how much I'd lost, brought a fresh wave of tears. This feeling, this chilling touch of the void, would become a recurring companion in the years to come. My parents arrived shortly after, their faces a mixture of relief and exhaustion. My mother, eyes red-rimmed, clung to me, a desperate embrace, as if to physically anchor me to the world of the living. My father, usually stoic, choked back tears, his gratitude for my survival palpable. The shower of love was overwhelming, a strange, warm balm after the cold. 3-day black spot in my life. It was nice, I had to admit, to be held, to be cared for, even by people who must have been secretly furious with me. But the nagging question, a persistent fly buzzing in my mind, wouldn't let me rest. "Where's Lindsay?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Once, then twice, the desperation growing with each syllable. My mother's face crumbled, tears streaming down her cheeks as she delivered the blow. "She's real banged up, honey. The doctors say she has significant brain damage. I'm so sorry." She dissolved into full-blown sobs. My father taking over, explaining how grateful he was that I was alive, how lucky I was. But all I could hear was brain damage. Lindsay, the girl I loved. "What kind of brain damage?" The words echoed in the sterile silence, a cruel, mocking whisper. I was terrified for her and disgusted with myself. The guilt, a crushing weight, settled deep in my chest, a phantom ache worse than my missing leg. This was the first brick in the wall of my fatal flaw, that accursed sense of responsibility that would always pull me back into the jaws of the abyss. A week blurred into the next, a haze of pain meds, physical therapy, and the bewildering process of learning to navigate a world that felt alien. I was getting used to the unsettling feel of my new prosthetic shin, a gleaming, cold piece of plastic and metal that was supposed to replace the flesh and bone that was no longer there. The idea that a part of me, a fundamental part of my body, simply ceased to exist was profoundly unsettling. It was a constant, chilling reminder of my own fragility and the permanence of my mistakes. Finally, and the day came when I was allowed to see Lindsay. She walked into my room, hesitant, almost timid, her movements stiff. The nurses allowed us a brief, supervised moment. I tried to speak to her, my voice gentle, full of the tenderness I felt, but she just seemed afraid of me, her eyes wide, wary. It was devastating, a fresh wound on my already raw soul. She simply managed a quiet, "Hello," and that was the extent of our conversation. I cried for hours that night, the humiliation and grief a bitter cocktail in my throat. I checked my wristwatch, a habit already forming, though it remained frozen, a useless symbol of shattered time. Weeks continued their slow, painful crawl, my speech therapy sessions, my attempts to relearn how to walk without falling, the awkward conversations with my parents about college applications that suddenly felt impossibly far away. Lindsay, meanwhile, was slowly recovering. Her speech, once slurred and hesitant, was gradually returning to normal, though still punctuated by a strange, almost artificial cadence. She told me about the endless hours of speech classes, the frustration of trying to force her tongue and brain to work together again. But even as her words flowed more freely, something felt off. Her personality. It wasn't the same girl I knew. We ate lunch together almost every day in the cafeteria, a ritual born of my lingering guilt and her quiet presence. Her tastes in food had undergone a bizarre revolution. She used to gag at the sight of broccoli. Now she devoured it, a strange, primal hunger in her eyes. Even her musical preferences, once a shared landscape of indie rock and pop, had dramatically shifted to some form of obscure, chanting folk music I couldn't stand. It pained me, a dull, constant throb, to witness how profoundly my reckless actions had warped her life, twisting her into someone unrecognizable. I became engrossed in her, more than ever before. It wasn't love anymore, not in the innocent way it had been before. It was obligation, a desperate need to atone. I felt I owed her everything, that I needed to be there for her, no matter what twisted form her recovery took. Whatever she wanted, whatever she needed. I told myself I wouldn't hesitate. We spent every spare moment together, me trying desperately to rebuild the shattered connections, to find the ghost of the girl I used to know. It was hard, so incredibly hard. I was trying to find the old her for a long, painful time before the crushing realization hit me. She wasn't all there. A large portion of her old self remained, a familiar echo, but the missing pieces were glaring, leaving a void that was filled with something else, something alien. My wristwatch, a constant, comforting weight, ticked on my wrist, though its hand still hadn't moved. A small, irrational part of me wondered if the time had stopped for her too, in some unseen dimension. Over the next few months, I grew alarmingly committed to this new, strange version of our relationship. I was, I suppose, trying to fall in love with the person she had become. This new and improved Lindsay, as she sometimes sarcastically called herself. The strangest thing was her memory. She still remembered intimate details of our shared past. The corny pet names we'd invented, the specific, slightly embarrassing sexual fetishes we'd explored. It was like communicating with 75% of my beloved girlfriend, while the other 25% was a wild, unpredictable stranger, surprising me in sometimes unfortunate, sometimes terrifying ways. Her sudden, absolute blind faith in Christianity, for instance, was jarring. 8 months prior, we had both been cynical, critical skeptics, dissecting every organized religion with the sharp wit of intelligent, rebellious teenagers. Now, she spoke of divine intervention and judgment with an unsettling zeal. Needless to say, we didn't talk about religion much. It invariably dissolved into a bitter, shouting match. Her anger, a new and unsettling facet of her personality, was a storm that gathered quickly and broke with terrifying force. I was now in my senior year of high school, a year that, according to every movie and every older sibling, was supposed to be the peak of my carefree youth. Instead, I was consumed by the needs of my impaired and increasingly demanding girlfriend. My friends, the ones who hadn't drifted away after the accident, eventually gave up on me. I devoted most of my time and energy to Lindsay, becoming a shadow of my former self. The constant demands, the emotional roller coaster, the sheer effort of navigating her new personality. It was exhausting. She was becoming high maintenance to an unbearable degree. And to my surprise, I found myself starting to resent it, to get sick of it. The thought, even the flicker of it, filled me with a fresh wave of guilt. How could I feel this way about someone I had hurt so badly? But the resentment grew, a slow-spreading poison. When I finally, tentatively, tried to broach the subject, perhaps suggesting we spend a little less time together, that I needed some space, it escalated into a full-blown fight, a screaming match that echoed in the empty halls of my mind long after it ended. And then came the threat. "If you leave me," she hissed, her eyes blazing with an unsettling intensity I hadn't seen before, "I'll kill myself." It truly frightened me. Lindsay never talked that way, ever. The words hung in the air, heavy and dark, and I was really, truly starting to wonder how much the accident had warped her. I couldn't deal with the stress, the crushing weight of imagining her death on my conscience, piled on top of everything else. So now, like a fool, I stayed. My wristwatch, though broken, felt like a tether to a sanity I was quickly losing. Our relationship, by the end of senior year, had become a toxic feedback loop, a vicious cycle of anger, emotional abuse, frantic, desperate sex, and fleeting moments of strained forgiveness. She hated it, absolutely hated it, if I ever dared to bring up the accident or how it had changed her, or if I called her out on any of her new, increasingly erratic habits. Her new personality possessed a steaming temper, one that genuinely scared me at times. She still threatened to kill herself, and even more frighteningly, she began to threaten me. Her words, delivered with a chilling conviction, seemed to hold more and more truth with each passing day. The air around her sometimes felt thick, charged, like before a storm or before something unseen made itself known. I had come to recognize that feeling in later years, the precursor to true horror. I remember one evening, the air heavy with unspoken threats. I looked at her, truly looked at the stranger in front of me, and asked, "What do I need to do, Lindsay? What do I need to do to prove to you that I love you?" Her response, delivered with a chillingly calm certainty, chilled me to the bone. She told me that if I truly loved her, I would beat up her ex-boyfriend, Marcus, in school the next day. Again, she threatened to kill herself if I didn't do it. At this point, I was truly worried. The threats, the demands, the sheer irrationality of it all. It was too much. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that I had to talk to her parents. I hadn't spoken to her mom or dad since the accident. They truly hated me for what I had done to their daughter, and I couldn't blame them. But this was different. This was beyond the scope of a ruined car and a damaged brain. This was about Lindsay's life, and perhaps mine. After she left for lacrosse practice that night, her absence a temporary, fragile relief, I took a walk to her house. The late afternoon air was crisp, carrying the scent of cut grass and distant exhaust fumes. I knocked on the door, a tentative rap that felt impossibly loud in the quiet neighborhood. No one answered. I knocked again, harder, the hollow sound echoing back at me. Still nothing. Finally, with a rising sense of desperation, I twisted the handle, unlocked. I pushed the door open a crack and peeked my head inside, calling out for her parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes? It's Leo." Her dad appeared almost instantly, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. "What the fuck are you doing here?" he cursed, his voice low and dangerous. "Listen," I pleaded, my voice thin. "First off, I owe you a long overdue apology, but I need to talk about Lindsay. She's..." I was cut off as the door slammed in my face, the sound of final, definitive rejection. I stood there, stunned, the cold wood pressing against my nose. I banged on the door a few more times, shouting, trying to explain that I was worried, that she wasn't herself. There was no response, just the deafening silence of a family's hatred. The leather of my jacket felt heavy, a burden rather than a comfort. My wristwatch, perpetually stuck, mocked me. I went home that night, a cold knot of fear tightening in my stomach. The next day, the threat of Marcus, of Lindsay, of myself. It hung over me like a suffocating shroud. Morning came, gray and indifferent, and I regretfully walked to school, each step a leaden weight. By midday, I had seen Lindsay a few times in the hallway, her eyes following me, a question in their depths. Her expression was unreadable, a blend of expectation and something colder. Finally, during a brief passing period, we stopped and spoke. Her voice, flat and uninflected, instructed me to meet her by the stairwell after lunch. The stairwell? The seldom used, forgotten passage in the older wing of the school, usually only frequented by delinquents and maintenance staff. A chill traced its way down my spine. I knew with a sickening certainty what was coming. So I did. After lunch, my stomach churning with anxiety, I made my way to the stairwell. The air in the stairwell was stale, heavy with the scent of dust and disinfectant. Lindsay was already there, leaning against the cold concrete wall, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She looked expectant. My hand went to my wristwatch, an unconscious tick, tracing the shattered glass. "So," she said, her voice a low murmur that seemed to fill the confined space. "Are you going to do it? Lindsay, No! My voice was firmer than I expected, a last stand against the encroaching madness. I'm not going to beat the shit out of Marcus just to prove that I love you. Why are you trying to make me do this? I argued, my frustration boiling over. Her smile vanished, replaced by a sneer. You can't even do one little thing I ask you to do? When did you become such a pussy? She resorted to her usual name-calling, a verbal lash that had become sickeningly familiar. It's not one little thing, Lindsay, I countered, my voice rising in volume, echoing off the concrete. You're asking me to assault your ex-boyfriend just to prove a point that I care about you. That's fucked up. Lindsay, and I'm not playing your mind games anymore. I stood my ground, my heart hammering against my ribs, a desperate defiance. She gritted her teeth, her jaw clenching as I refused to bend to her will. Her eyes, usually a soft hazel, seemed to darken, to become bottomless pits. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement that made my blood run cold, she reached into her backpack. My breath hitched. She pulled out a small, mowing, gleaming utility knife, its blade wickedly sharp, catching the meager light from the stairwell window. She pressed the point of it, casually, against the tender skin of her wrist. Lindsay, stop! I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat, raw with terror. I'll do it right here, she threatened, her voice a flat monotone, devoid of emotion. I'll bleed myself dry if you don't fuck him up when he comes up these stairs when the bell rings. The words hung in the stale air, punctuated by the faint, distant hum of the school, the indifferent world outside. I swallowed, a dry, painful gulp, terrified on multiple levels. I stood rooted to the spot. We sat there, the silence punctuated only by my ragged breathing and the distant school sounds, moments stretching into an eternity. I tried to reason with her, to explain how irrational she was being, how this wasn't the answer, but she only pressed the blade harder against her skin, a tiny bead of crimson welling up. The horror, the absolute bone-deep horror of what she might do, what I might be forced to witness, choked me. I realized, with a sickening certainty, that I had no other choice. She was truly going to do it. The thought of leaving, of running to tell someone, flashed through my mind. But I was sure she would make good on her threat if I even so much as flinched. The weight of her life, and my guilt, pressed down on me, forcing me into a decision I knew I would regret. Finally, the bell shrilled, its harsh sound echoing through the stairwell, signaling the end of lunch, the moment of truth. I looked at her once more, my eyes pleading, trying to articulate, one last time, why this was pointless, why it was so utterly messed up for her to be doing this. But my words died in my throat, swallowed by the rising tide of panic. I didn't know if I could handle seeing her slit her wrist in front of me, the memory of her prom dress, slick with blood, flashing through my mind. In that brief, agonizing moment, Marcus came slowly up the steps, his backpack slung over one shoulder, probably lost in thought about some video game or homework. He glanced at me, gave me a strange, questioning look, a frown creasing his brow. Hey, Mark, I said, my voice timid, barely a whisper. I couldn't do it. My fists, already bruised from a lifetime of other people's mistakes, clenched uselessly at my sides. He started to walk past me, his casual movement a stark contrast to the maelstrom in my gut. And then I heard it, Lindsay's scream. Do it! It was a shriek, primal and guttural, that ripped through the quiet stairwell. My eyes snapped to her. I saw it then, a drop of bright, shocking red blood, blossoming on her arm, just below the delicate pulse point, where the blade had hardly broken her skin. That was it. That was the moment something in me snapped. The world narrowed to Marcus. Rage, fear, guilt, a lifetime of suppressed trauma, it all converged into a single, explosive point. I slammed Marcus by his neck to the ground, his head thumping sickeningly against a concrete stair. He groaned, a pained, winded sound, from the harsh impact. And then I was on him, a roaring animal. My fists became weapons, a blur of motion. His head bounced off the ground again and again, a grotesque drumbeat to my madness. My knuckles connected with his face, the satisfying crack of bone and cartilage, the warm, wet rush of blood. "Is this what you fucking want?" I screamed, my voice ragged, raw, as my fist connected, cracking his nose, collapsing his eye socket. I didn't stop. I continued until he was hardly breathing, his face a pulpy, unrecognizable mask drenched in his own blood, his throat gurgling a desperate plea for air. A small, rational part of my brain, a part I barely recognized, whispered about the consequences, but it was drowned out by the roar of the red mist. Moments later, the shouts began. Numerous people, teachers, students, their faces a mixture of horror and shock, surrounded us. Strong hands, too many to count, tore me to my feet, dragging me down the hall. Away from the carnage, I struggled, still consumed by the primal urge to hit, to punish. I vaguely registered a flash of rose gold fabric, a fleeting glimpse of Lindsay's form. She fled, just like that. She melted into the frantic crowd, fearing she would get into trouble as well, as she should. I sat in the principal's office for what felt like hours, the fluorescent lights buzzing mockingly above my head, the smell of disinfectant clinging to my blood-stained hands. Principal Thompson, a man who had, for years, given me an inexplicable amount of leeway, his face a mask of disappointment and cold fury, paced back and forth. He told me he'd given me enough slack, that I'd gone way too far this time, that there would be severe consequences. I tried to explain, to articulate the nightmare I had been living, the manipulation, Lindsay's threats, the knife. I babbled, desperate to make them understand, to unburden myself of the horrific truth. Finally, my parents showed up, their faces ashen, accompanied by the school counselor, a young woman with a perpetually sympathetic, yet ultimately useless, expression. They explained what had happened, gesturing to my bloodied hands, to the furious principal. I desperately told them about Lindsay, about the knife, about the last few months, how she had been acting, how she had changed, how she had made me do it. The counselor, her expression unreadable, had a small laptop open on her desk, a flash drive plugged into the side. Without a word, she clicked play on the video. The principal nodded, a grim, knowing look on his face. My parents exchanged a worried glance, then all eyes turned to the screen. We watched in silence, the only sound the faint whir of the laptop's fan. My blood turned to ice in my veins as I watched the grainy security footage of the corner staircase. I stood there, alone in the stairwell, my back to the camera, bantering to the tiled wall. My parents cringed, recoiling in horror, as they watched me mercilessly assault Marcus. Only the two of us were visible in the stairwell, just me and Marcus's crumpled form. No Lindsay, no rose gold dress, no knife, nothing. Just me, talking to empty air, screaming at a ghost, driven to violence by a hallucination. The words of the principal, the counselor, my parents, faded into a dull roar. The world had split open again, and this time, I knew there was no patching it back together. That was the day I truly learned that the horror wasn't just out there. It was also in here, a seed planted in that crumpled car, nurtured by guilt, and blossoming into a terrifying, inescapable reality. This was the true beginning of the weary wanderer, the haunted everyman, the one who started running, not just from what the world held, but from what his own mind could conjure. Total characters, 9877. The crack of bone under my improvised weapon was sickeningly loud, a sound that would forever echo in the hollow chambers of my memory. It was followed by a wet, gurgling scream from Nick, my roommate, who crumpled to the floor, clutching his shattered shin. My knuckles were white, still gripping the leg of the overturned kitchen chair, and a primal, unfamiliar rage thrummed through my veins. A dark current that had surged from somewhere deep inside me, taking hold of the wheel and steering me into an abyss I didn't recognize. The air in the apartment, usually thick with the scent of stale microwave popcorn and desperation, now carried a faint, coppery tang and something else, a sweet, cloying aroma that clung to the back of my throat, vaguely reminiscent of the pizza we devoured hours earlier. My chest heaved, adrenaline pumping, but there was no real satisfaction, just a profound, chilling emptiness and the dawning realization that I had just fundamentally altered someone's life and my own in a burst of inexplicable, demonic fury. Only moments before, I'd been slumped on the couch, stomach growling, trying to decide what grease-laden disappointment we'd be ordering for dinner. Funny how quickly an ordinary Friday night can unravel into a personal hell, even when you've already been living in one for years. This was just another layer, another fresco of torment painted onto the walls of my already crumbling psyche. I glanced at my old analog wristwatch, a nervous habit more than a practical one. The hands hadn't moved much since yesterday, but everything else had shifted catastrophically. It was an oppressive Friday, the kind where the air itself felt like a suffocating blanket, even inside. The thermometer stubbornly clung to 90 degrees, turning the thought of firing up the stove into a cruel joke. I was sprawled on the worn-out couch, the synthetic leather sticky against my bare arms, scrolling aimlessly through Reddit, half listening to Nick's attempts at culinary suggestion. Nick, my new roommate, he'd moved in last week, filling the void left by the last one, who'd bolted after some disagreements. Not that it mattered. They all moved on, eventually. I was the constant, the immovable object in a world of ever-shifting scenery, always just trying to keep the anonymity and the bills paid. Chinese? Nick's voice drifted in from the kitchen, muffled by the clatter of what I assumed was him failing to find a clean mug. I grunted, not bothering to look up from the glowing screen. Nah, they take too long. By the time it gets here, it's already cold enough to be used as a murder weapon, and probably tastes like one too. Anna, my default setting these days was cynical, a defense mechanism against a world that perpetually proved my worst suspicions correct. He emerged, wiping his hands on a towel, leaning against the doorframe. McDonald's then? I shook my head, a muscle twitching in my jaw. They always manage to screw up my order. It's a talent, really like a dark magic. But for fast food, Nick sighed, a gust of weary air. You're hard to please, Vance. A dry chuckle escaped me. Yeah, well, the world's been working overtime to displease me for a while now. Guess I'm just returning the favor. The words were out before I could stop them, a sarcastic self-deprecation that always felt a little too close to the bone. So, what culinary masterpiece do you suggest we grace with our presence tonight? He crossed his arms, an expectant look on his face. He was still new, still trying to navigate the minefield that was my general demeanor. He hadn't learned yet that I was less a person and more a walking, breathing biohazard of bad luck. I shrugged, the movement a little too tired for a Friday evening. My gaze fell back to my phone screen. An ad had popped up. Hell's Kitchen. The name seemed to pulse, an unsettling red against the dark background, and it was local, apparently, in our small, forgettable town. That's something, I muttered, more to myself than to him. What's what? Nick called out, already retreating to the kitchen, probably for more scavenging. Nothing, I yelled back, a familiar prickle of paranoia starting at the base of my neck. I knew how these things worked. The algorithms, the deep listening. It was just a stupid ad, a coincidence, right? He walked back in, still wiping his hands, the towel looking suspiciously like one of my good ones. It's just this conspiracy theory, I started, trying to sound casual, failing miserably. How the government listens in on our conversations, then gives us appropriate ads. We were just talking about food, and I got an ad for this new place in town, Hell's Kitchen. He plopped down on the couch, the springs groaning in protest, leaning in to peer at my screen. His face was a mirror of curiosity. Looks aggressive. I tapped the ad, letting it take me to their homepage. My stomach rumbled, a surprisingly normal sound in the burgeoning strangeness. Let's see what kind of culinary damnation they're offering. Navigating to the menu, the list of items stretched out, each name a theatrical pronouncement. Hell wings, Nick mumbled, his eyes widening. He loved spicy food, the kind that made lesser mortals weep. This would be right up his alley. My internal alarm bells, however, were clanging like a firehouse in a hurricane. This wasn't quirky, it was just wrong. Evil fries, I read aloud, my voice flat. What kind of name is that? They look like regular fries. Probably just charge extra for the edgy moniker. Every item had some blasphemous, infernal name. It was trying too hard, or not hard enough. Either way, it set my teeth on edge. Pizza of darkness, Nick pointed, his finger almost touching my screen. That sounds good, I recoiled, a genuine shiver tracing my spine. It has pineapple. Dude, that's not darkness. That's just a crime against nature. My cynicism was a strong shield, but some things still got through. Pineapple on pizza was one of them. Then how about Inferno pizza? Just spicy pepperoni. He sounded hopeful. I shrugged, considering, maybe, definitely sounds better than the fruit on pizza abomination. We could also get some tortured hamburgers, I added, my voice laced with mock solemnity. It was a coping mechanism, turning the absurd into a joke, even if the joke tasted like ash in my mouth. Nah, don't feel like a burger, Nick replied and then chuckled. And you say I'm hard to please. He found it hilarious. I managed a weak smile, but the humor was already fading, replaced by a growing unease. My mind, ever vigilant for the wrongness that seemed to follow me like a shadow, was already picking up threads. The name of the place, the uncanny speed of the ad, the aggressive menu. It felt personal, like it was waiting for me, just like everything else always was. After a few more minutes of discussing the various horrors on offer, we finally settled on the pizza of wrath, pepperoni, bacon strips, mushrooms, and a mild ghost pepper sauce. The choice felt less like a decision and more like a surrender. Is there a number we're supposed to call, or do we order online? Nick asked, oblivious to the increasing tension in my gut as I scrolled to the bottom of the page, searching for contact information. Don't see an online option. Must be a number tucked away somewhere. My thumb hovered. My old wristwatch seemed to hum. A nervous twitch. A silent reminder that time was always ticking, always bringing me closer to something. Ah, there, found it, I exclaimed, a little too loudly, the relief momentary. My stomach gave another hungry rumble, a protest against the simmering dread. Nick chuckled. Me too, me too. I double-checked the order with Nick, then dialed the number. It rang once. Then it was picked up. No jingle, no automated greeting, no pleasant human voice, just a heavy, echoing silence. My hand, for some reason, felt clammy around the phone. This was already off script. Hello, is this Hell's Kitchen? We'd like to order some food. My voice sounded brittle, thin in the sudden quiet of the room. A deep, raspy voice responded. It felt like gravel dragging over old bones, like something not quite human struggling to form words. Yes, what would you like to have? I swallowed hard, the dryness in my throat sudden and acute. Okay, we'd like 2 pizzas of wrath, small evil fries, and 2 large Cokes of doom. Each name felt like a weight, a heavy, cursed syllable as it left my lips. I winced internally, the ridiculousness of it almost overpowering the creeping dread. Almost. The voice paused, a full beat of unsettling silence. Is that all? I glanced at Nick, who was now bent over, shoulders shaking with silent laughter. What a goddamn moron. I wasn't sure which one of us was more embarrassing in this moment. Yes, that will be all. Okay, it'll be delivered to you in a minute. Wait, I didn't give you my address. I practically shouted into the receiver, but the line was already dead. The dial tone a mocking buzz in my ear. I stared at the phone, then slowly lowered it. A sigh escaped me, more a deflating balloon of exasperation and disbelief than anything else. I redialed, my thumb already hovering over the contact list for a backup plan, maybe a normal pizza place this time. The recipient you are trying to reach is currently not available. Please try again at another time. A tinny, infuriatingly polite automated voice. What's up? Nick finally managed to ask, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. They don't have the address, I explained, my voice tight with irritation. And now the number's disconnected. Not available? What the hell does that mean? I just talked to them a moment ago. My mind, conditioned by years of inexplicable horrors, was already bracing itself. This wasn't normal. This was the prelude. My skin crawled. Then, as if on cue, a sudden, insistent ding-dong ripped through the silence of the apartment, the sound vibrating through the very floorboards. Our heads snapped to the front door, a shared moment of incredulous horror. Nick's face, still flushed from laughter, went pale. There's no way, right? He whispered, his voice cracking. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage. Run! A voice screamed in my head. A familiar primal urge that had saved my life more times than I could count. But my feet were already moving, a magnetic pull dragging me toward the door, towards the impossible. It was the same accursed impulse that made me investigate strange noises in abandoned warehouses, or pick up hitchhikers on desolate roads. My reluctant conscience, a flaw I cursed daily, was already tugging me towards the inevitable confrontation. I peered through the peephole. The distorted lens showed a man, dressed in a business suit, dark, short hair neatly coiffed. He held a couple of pizza boxes stacked neatly, a small paper bag perched on top. Professional, almost mundane, except for his eyes. They were a deep, unsettling red, the color of fresh blood on snow, or a dying ember. I didn't even know such an eye color existed naturally. My breath hitched. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to lock the door, to barricade myself, to flee. This wasn't just dangerous. This was a predator. And I was the prey. I took a deep, shuddering breath, tasting bile at the back of my throat, and opened the door. The man on the other side towered over me, a dark silhouette against the late afternoon light that somehow seemed dimmer around him. A smile, slow and deliberate, stretched across his face, revealing teeth that were just a little too white, too sharp. Is this Jonah's and Nick's residence? His voice was a smooth, unsettling rumble, the raspiness gone. My gulp was loud enough to be heard in the oppressive silence. How did he know my name? I never used it on the phone, much less Nick's. A cold dread, bone deep and absolute, began to coil in my stomach. This was it. This was the moment the normal world peeled back, and the true horror beneath revealed itself. I didn't need a fortune teller to tell me this guy wasn't just a pizza delivery driver. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. His smile widened, a predatory gleam in those crimson eyes. I have your food delivery here. My name is Lucifer. A deep, icy shiver snaked down my spine, the kind that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with a primal understanding of ultimate danger. My entire body screamed at me to run, to slam the door, to disappear into the anonymity I so desperately craved. Whoever was standing in front of me was not just dangerous, he was an existential threat. This felt like the dark, consuming echo of something from my past, a deep, unsettling resonance with an unremembered terror. Perhaps even the lingering psychic burn of the fire that had taken my family, leaving me untouched but forever scarred. "Why don't you come inside?" Nick's voice, annoyingly cheerful and utterly oblivious, sliced through the tension, materializing beside me. I shot him a look, a desperate plea to read the room, to feel the suffocating weight of wrongness emanating from the man on our doorstep. He ignored me, as people always did when it came to reading my unspoken warnings. We both stepped aside, a surreal, horrifying welcome, and let Lucifer, the fucking Prince of Darkness, into our cramped living room. The air shifted, grew heavier, as he stepped over the threshold. It wasn't a physical change, more a psychic one, a subtle drop in the atmospheric pressure. He took a deep, deliberate breath once inside, as if savoring the mundane air of our apartment, and then walked directly to the small coffee table in front of the sofa, placing the boxes in the paper bag with an almost theatrical flourish. My voice, when it came, was a reedy whisper. "How much do we owe you?" The question felt absurd, a desperate clinging to normalcy in a rapidly unraveling reality. He turned, his smile still fixed, those impossibly red eyes fixing on us both. "Would you like to pay now, or after you die?" The words hung in the air, cold and sharp as shards of ice. "After I die?" I stammered, the question feeling foolish even as I asked it. My analog watch felt heavy on my wrist, a useless comfort. "Yes, you'll sign a contract to pay after your death." His voice was impossibly smooth, like silk rubbed over bone. "I'll pay after I die," Nick chirped beside me, a wide, enthusiastic grin plastered across his face. "Sounds fun." My God, the sheer idiocy. He was going to get us both killed, or worse. "I'll pay now," I responded immediately, the words like a desperate prayer. How would I even pay after I died? This sounded less like a business transaction and more like a demonic scam. Nothing, absolutely nothing about this situation made any sense. My instincts, honed by years of running from the incomprehensible, were screaming for escape. Lucifer nodded, a small, knowing movement, and clapped his hands together. The sound was like two stones grinding, dry and resonant. In an instant, two folders, thick with documents, materialized on the coffee table beside the pizza boxes. They weren't there a second ago. They simply appeared. My breath caught in my throat. He motioned for Nick to come over, then snapped his fingers. A pen, sleek and dark, appeared between his fingers, which he handed to my utterly oblivious roommate. Nick looked genuinely excited as he took the pen, as if he'd just been given a golden ticket. Lucifer flipped open the folder on the left. "Read through this if you want. Otherwise, you can sign here and here." His long, elegant finger pointed to the bottom of the page, a perfect, unblemished nail. "Jonah, want to come over to check your contract out?" he asked, his crimson gaze sweeping over to me. "My contract? I thought I'd be paying now." The dread in my stomach was solidifying, turning to cold lead. He nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Yes, you will be." My legs felt like lead weights, heavy and unsteady, as I walked over. The apartment suddenly felt too small, too warm, the air thick and cloying. The contract laid out before me, stark black text on crisp white paper, seemed to mock my every attempt at reason. Service contract. This contract is between the following parties: contractor Lucifer, the Prince of Darkness; client Jonah. Upon mutual agreement, the client will have 31 days to complete the following to pay for the services provided by the contractor. 1. Consume the food that was delivered. 2. Introduce 3 friends to Hell's Kitchen. 3. Sever ties with the closest person to the client. 4. Murder a single person. Failure to comply with these terms will result in the client immediately relinquishing their rights to their soul. What the hell was this? A joke? A twisted prank? My mind reeled. Consume the food? Fine. Introduce 3 friends? I barely had 3 friends, and none I'd willingly condemn to this. Sever ties with the closest person? That was Nick, apparently the moron who just invited Satan into our living room. And murder? My gaze lingered on that last clause, a cold, hard stone settling in my gut. This wasn't just payment. This was damnation. This was a blueprint for tearing a soul apart, a slow, methodical disembowelment. It reminded me, vaguely, of the way the world had been chipping away at me since I was a kid, since the fire, since the darkness had found me. Can't I just pay with cash? I looked up at Lucifer, my voice betraying the tremor in my hands. He smiled, slow and deliberate, and shook his head. By ordering our food, you agreed to sign either one of the contracts provided. His voice was impossibly calm, impossibly assured. He wasn't giving me a choice. Not really. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a declaration. What's the other contract then? How do I pay after I die? I asked. A desperate, futile attempt to find a loophole, a less horrifying option. He nodded to himself, as if appreciating my tenacity, or perhaps just savoring the moment. You'll work at Hell's Kitchen for 7 years. After that, your debt will be paid off. My jaw tightened. 7 years of servitude in a literal Hell's Kitchen after I died? The first contract was a nightmare of moral decay. The second was eternal indentured servitude. Both felt like a spiraling descent into the abyss that had been chasing me for years. But the murder clause, I couldn't. My reluctant conscience, the one I constantly fought against, the one that always dragged me into situations I should avoid, flared. I couldn't commit murder, not even to save my soul, or perhaps, especially, not to save my soul, if that was the price. My old wristwatch, a small anchor in the storm, suddenly felt too heavy. I swallowed hard, the muscles in my neck protesting, and took a deep breath that did little to calm the frantic hammering in my chest. I wished to pay after my death. Then, the words were a bitter pill, a surrender, but at least it didn't involve me becoming a literal murderer. Yet, Lucifer clapped his hands together, the dry, stone-grinding sound echoing in the small room. "Excellent choice," he exclaimed, a little too loudly, a little too gleefully. The very air around him seemed to hum with dark satisfaction. A new contract shimmered into existence before me, replacing the old one. Just like that, no sleight of hand, no flash of light, just there. Service contract. This contract is between the following parties: contractor, Lucifer, the Prince of Darkness; client, Jonah. Upon mutual agreement, the client will work at Hell's Kitchen for 7 years after they die. Failure to comply with these terms will result in the client immediately relinquishing their rights to their soul. How did I even get here? One minute I was a cynical, world-weary drifter trying to keep my head down, trying to outrun the ghosts of my past, and the next I'd signed away my soul for a damn pizza. This was the cosmic joke. This was why I never got comfortable. This was why I stayed on the move. Because the universe, or whatever malicious entity governed it, always found a way to drag me deeper into its own sick game. The vague, persistent feeling of being marked, of being a magnet for the worst kind of evil, solidified into a terrifying certainty. "Done!" Nick exclaimed, a triumphant grin splitting his face from ear to ear. He handed the pen back to Lucifer, who took it with a languid grace. Lucifer pointed the pen toward me, the dark tip seeming to pulse with malevolent energy, signaling for me to take it. His red eyes bored into mine. Ready to sign? My hand trembled, a visible tremor that I couldn't control. What if I don't want to sign either contract? It was a pathetic, sure, last-ditch effort, a desperate cry against the inevitable. Lucifer sighed, a sound of profound exasperation, and placed a palm over his face. The gesture was shockingly human, almost bored. Then, as he dropped his hand, his features seemed to ripple, subtly twisting. His eyes blazed, a deeper, more infernal red, and his voice dropped, turning into a guttural, demonic growl that vibrated through the floor and directly into my bones, chilling me to my marrow. Refusal to sign either contract will result in your immediate extraction to hell, where you'll stay till the end of time. The raw power in his voice, the sheer, undeniable threat, hammered into me. My pathetic defiance crumbled. The choice wasn't between bad and worse, it was between bad and oblivion. I took the pen from his hand, my fingers brushing against his cold, strangely smooth skin. He retracted his palm from his face, and his features seemed to snap back into their perfectly human, slightly unsettling form. He even adjusted his collar, as if the brief display of cosmic power had disheveled him. My hand was shaking so violently I almost dropped the pen. The signature I scrawled was barely legible, a grotesque parody of my name. It felt like signing my own death warrant, my own damnation papers, all for the sake of avoiding being dragged to a literal hell right now. Survival was a grim, joyless business. "Excellent," Lucifer exclaimed, his voice regaining its unsettlingly cheerful tone. He clapped his hands together again, and the contracts, mine and Nick's, vanished as swiftly as they had appeared, leaving no trace behind. "I hope you enjoy your food," he commented, a beatific smile on his face, and began walking back toward the front door. "We will." "So," Nick responded, still utterly enthralled, still clueless. Once the front door clicked shut behind him, sealing us back into our apartment, I didn't just sit down, I collapsed onto the couch, every muscle in my body suddenly devoid of strength, my hands shaking uncontrollably. A cold sweat plastered my shirt to my skin. My heart was still hammering, an erratic drum solo in my chest. I stared at the closed door, half expecting it to burst open, half expecting something, anything. Meanwhile, Nick, oblivious to my near catatonic state, had already ripped open the paper bag, pulled out his Coke of Doom, and was taking a long, noisy sip. He then tore into the pizza of wrath, the aroma filling the room. "What the hell just happened?" I managed to choke out, my voice still hoarse, a thin thread of disbelief woven through it. Nick looked up, mouth full, pizza grease shining on his chin. "What do you mean? They delivered our food. Nothing else happened." He swallowed, then took another bite. "This is the best damn pizza I've ever had. Jonah, you gotta try this." I sighed, a long, drawn-out sound of resignation. Since I'd essentially signed my soul away to the Prince of Darkness for this damn thing, I might as well eat it. My stomach was still rumbling, a strangely persistent, mundane need in the face of such profound horror. Nick nodded profusely, already halfway through his first slice. In stark contrast to the terrifying, soul-shattering experience of dealing with a literal demon, the food tasted incredible. It was better than anything I'd ever had before. The crust was perfectly crispy, the sauce a complex symphony of savory and subtly spicy notes, the toppings fresh and flavorful. It was a culinary masterpiece, a fleeting moment of perfection that seemed utterly impossible given its provenance. It was a taste that bypassed mere hunger and resonated on some deeper, more primordial level, leaving me feeling energized. Too energized. All that was yesterday. Nick and I hadn't talked about it again. He probably thought I was having a breakdown, or just being my usual paranoid self. But this morning, something snapped. We'd had a small fight. Over what? I barely remembered. Maybe a dirty dish. Maybe a misplaced remote. It escalated, faster than it should have. A sharp word, a shove, and then the rage. It wasn't mine, not entirely. It was cold, pure, exhilarating, and completely alien. It flooded my senses, tightening my vision, sharpening my hearing. Nick's face, usually so open, contorted into a mask of similar, unholy fury. It was like looking into a mirror, but the reflection was a monster. I hadn't meant to. I didn't know what came over me, or him, but I was just so incredibly angry at everything, including him, and he seemed to be the same way. It was a dance of pure, unadulterated aggression. He swung, I ducked, I pushed, he stumbled. Then I saw the kitchen chair. My hand closed around its leg, the worn wood familiar, comforting in its solidity. And then I swung, hard. I heard the crack, a wet, sickening sound that reverberated through the apartment, and Nick's scream, shrill and animalistic. The rage, the alien fury, broke. It was like a dam bursting, leaving me drained, horrified, and utterly bewildered. The food, the damn pizza, it was 110, phenomenal. Would highly recommend. The price, however, was outrageously high. A leg, a soul, 7 years of afterlife slavery. Still, I could safely say, with a chilling certainty that scared me more than Lucifer himself, that it was worth it. And the worst part? A part of me, a small, dark, insistent whisper, was already thinking of ordering again. My go-bag was still by the door, but for the first time, the thought of fleeing felt less urgent than the promise of another taste of hell. The bitter Alaskan wind was a familiar companion, a constant reminder that nature cared little for human comfort. Tonight, however, it carried a different kind of chill, one that had nothing to do with the sub-zero temperatures clinging to the glass of the police cruiser. Emily sat inside, bathed in the flashing red and blue of emergency lights, her hands clasped neatly in her lap, a serene smile playing on her lips. A perfect picture of innocence, except for the cold, dead light in her eyes that mirrored the void in the crawl space beneath the house. My stomach knotted, a familiar vice tightening around my gut. The articles, the quiet house, the cloying smell. It all clicked into place with a sickening finality. She wasn't the victim, not really. She was the architect. It started, as it always did, with something mundane, a leaky faucet, a late-night call. Another broken piece of the world I felt obligated to try and fix, even when every fiber of my being screamed for me to stay put, to just let the damn thing drip. I've been managing properties for over a decade, mostly the isolated ones, the ones clinging to the wild edges of Alaska, and I developed a sixth sense for trouble. It usually announced itself with a missing rent payment or the sudden, telltale silence of a tenant who'd skipped town. So when Emily Rivers moved in, she felt like an anomaly. Too good to be true, which, in my experience, usually meant she'd materialized in my life like a ghost. Polite and almost unnervingly quiet, her rent check arrived like clockwork, always early, every single month. She kept to herself, which suited me fine. I wasn't looking for new friends, especially not after everything. The less interaction, the better. She worked for some tech company she'd mentioned with odd hours, which explained her occasional absence. She'd chosen the rental specifically for its privacy. She said, its location on the very fringe of town, swallowed by the encroaching woods, a prime spot for someone who wanted to disappear, or for someone who wanted to make someone disappear. My cynicism, well honed over years of dealing with the quirks and cruelties of humanity, immediately filed her under suspiciously perfect. Nothing was ever perfect. Not in this life. Not for me. Her husband, if he existed, was a phantom. Emily handled everything, every email, every question, every payment. It was like he was a convenient fiction, a placeholder in her life that never quite solidified into a real person. I never pushed it. My job wasn't to pry into the marital arrangements of my tenants, just to ensure the plumbing worked and the checks cleared. I just logged it away. Another small, unsettling detail in the otherwise unblemished facade of Emily Rivers. A few weeks ago, My old flip phone buzzed on the dashboard of my truck. Emily, a text, not a call. It was late, pushing 10, the kind of hour when most folks were winding down, not dealing with domestic emergencies. Leaky faucet, the text read, stark against the glowing screen. It's urgent. The dripping is driving me crazy. She'd added a string of polite, desperate emojis, practically begging. My first thought was to brush her off until morning. Plumbing emergencies rarely warranted a late-night call unless water was actively flooding the living room. But then that damned, regrettable flicker of responsibility, the Achilles heel I'd never quite managed to cauterize, flared up. Fine, I muttered to myself, rubbing the stubble on my chin. Another late-night drive to nowhere. I grabbed my ancient toolkit, the leather worn smooth from years of use, and pulled on my jacket. It was an old, battered thing, but it was mine. A second skin that had seen more horrors than I cared to count. A small comfort against the vast indifference of the Alaskan night. I glanced at my analog wristwatch, more out of habit than need. 10:17 p.m. The hands seemed to crawl. The drive to her place was short, but the silence of the forest road felt heavy, pressing in on the truck. The pines stood like dark, watchful sentinels, their branches thick with shadows that seemed to shift just at the periphery of my vision. By the time I pulled into her gravel driveway, the air was still and cold, a premonition in the frigid bite. Emily's car wasn't there, confirming her odd hours claim. I pulled the spare key from my ring, the cold metal digging into my palm, and let myself in. "Emily," I called out, my voice swallowed by the unnatural quiet of the house. No answer, just the hollow echo of my own inquiry. The house was wrong, spotless, yes, but not just clean. It was sterile, a display home, not a lived-in space. No muddy boots by the door, no half-read book on a coffee table, no overflowing mail slot, not even a single misplaced crumb on the pristine countertops. It was as if someone had meticulously bleached away every trace of human habitation, every imperfection, every speck of dust that might hint at a life lived within its walls. The air itself felt thin, scrubbed clean of scent, almost metallic. I could practically hear the hum of the refrigerator in the silence. It put me on edge immediately. I wanted to get the job done and get out. My instincts, usually a reliable barometer for impending doom, were screaming. This was too neat, too perfect. Something was profoundly, fundamentally off. I found the source of the problem in the kitchen, just as she'd said. The faucet dripped with maddening regularity, a tiny, insistent drumbeat in the oppressive silence. It wasn't anything major, just a loose valve, probably jarred by a pipe shift or age. As I tightened it with a practiced hand, my fingers brushed against the chrome of the garbage disposal, and a faint, cloying smell wafted up, metallic, sour, horrific, like a butcher shop on a hot day, but worse, with an underlying sweetness that spoke of decay. It wasn't the usual kitchen stink of old food scraps. This was something else entirely, something organic and wrong. My observational skills, honed by years of seeing things I shouldn't, took over. My gaze lingered on the drain, a dark maw in the gleaming sink. The stench was pulling at me, an unwelcome curiosity. Against my better judgment, and Lord knows I have a long history of ignoring better judgment, I grabbed the heavy-duty mag light from my toolkit. The beam cut a sharp path through the dim kitchen, illuminating the glistening maw of the disposal. I peered down, holding my breath, the sour metallic scent stinging my nostrils. At first, I couldn't make sense of the dark mass clinging to the blades, just a wet, indistinct blob. But then the light shifted, catching a stray strand, and my gut lurched. Hair, long, dark, matted hair, thick and tangled, a horrifying nest clogging the disposal. It wasn't just a few strands from a shower drain. This was a mass, a lot of it, Too much. My stomach coiled, and I instinctively pulled back, gagging, a wave of nausea washing over me. "None of my business," I muttered aloud, the words tasting like ash. "Absolutely none of my damn business." Maybe she tried to wash out a wig, I told myself, clutching at the flimsy straw of normalcy, or a shedding pet. Though the house showed no signs of a pet, people do weird things, right? Especially when they live out here, isolated. My mind raced, searching for any logical explanation, anything to calm the rising tide of dread. But the smell, oh God, the smell. It clung to me, seeping into my clothes, permeating the very air I breathed. It was the smell of something not quite dead, or maybe something recently made dead. That night, sleep was a cruel joke. The cloying scent, even after I'd scrubbed my hands raw, seemed to stick to my skin, lingering in my nostrils. The image of that matted hair, a wet, dark tangle in the drain, replayed itself on the inside of my eyelids. I tossed and turned, the worn leather jacket I draped over the chair, a silent, reassuring weight in the darkness, yet offering no real comfort. My old analog watch, abandoned on the nightstand, seemed to tick louder than usual, counting down to whatever fresh hell awaited me. Then, the nightmare came, greeting me with open, skeletal arms. It was vivid, grotesque, and utterly relentless. I was back in that sterile kitchen, the dripping faucet a rhythmic pulse in the silence. The disposal, a hungry maw, began to churn, but instead of hair, something else was emerging. Slowly, viciously, a mangled, skeletal figure, like a broken puppet but with bones and muscles tied on, visible under pale, translucent skin that draped over it like a wet bedsheet. Its limbs were elongated, disproportionate, its head tilted at an impossible angle. It oozed from the drain, wet and slick, its form shimmering in the dim light. I could hear the faint, sickening slurp as it pulled itself free, each movement accompanied by the creak of unseen joints. It was pure, distilled horror, the kind that burrowed deep into your subconscious and set up permanent residence. Just as its head snapped towards me, its empty eye sockets fixing me with an ancient, malevolent gaze, the shrill, jarring shriek of my alarm clock tore through the darkness. 7 a.m. A blessed, albeit violent, reprieve. I lay there for a long moment, heart hammering against my ribs, the lingering scent of decay in my memory, the phantom touch of cold fear on my skin. That dream, a grotesque harbinger, was something I wouldn't forget for a very, very long time. It was a stark reminder of the things that festered just beneath the surface of the mundane world, and how easily they could claw their way out. The next day, Emily texted, a bland, "Thank you for fixing the faucet." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to ask about the hair, about the smell, about the unsettling emptiness of her house. But that cynical part of me, the part that had learned to stay out of trouble by minding its own business, held me back. It wasn't my place. That nightmare, I reasoned, was just the price of my own morbid curiosity. "Don't go looking for answers, Leo," it whispered. "You won't like what you find." I closed the message, the unspoken questions hanging heavy in the air between us, a silent barrier I chose not to cross. But the seed had been planted. The image of the hair, the smell, the sterile house, they burrowed into my mind like parasites, refusing to let go. That night, instead of my usual routine of poring over truck routes or sorting through receipts in the dimly lit motel room, I pulled up Emily's rental application on my ancient laptop. Everything was by the book: steady job, good credit, no criminal record, flawless, too flawless. A gut feeling, that insidious, persistent intuition that had saved my skin more times than I cared to admit, gnawed at me. Something was off. It always was. I closed the application and opened a new browser tab. Emily Rivers, I typed, the words feeling heavy. A transgression? My first search brought up her social media profiles. Sparse, mostly work-related posts, a few generic vacation photos. Nothing to explain the unsettling feeling she gave me. No red flags. I felt a fleeting sense of relief, followed by a familiar surge of self-recrimination. See, Leo? Just a normal person. You're just paranoid. But the paranoia was a friend, a grim, unwelcome companion that had kept me alive. I widened my search, adding keywords: news, arrest, incident. My finger hovered over the trackpad, a nervous tick. And then, there it was, an article from 6 years ago. The headline, stark and uncompromising, burned itself into my retina. Emily Rivers, local woman involved in brutal home invasion. My breath hitched. The details that followed were a cold shower of dread. She'd been attacked in her apartment late at night by a man. She'd fought him off. He'd escaped before the police arrived. The article mentioned he'd been caught later, imprisoned on breaking and entering charges. And then, a detail that made the blood drain from my face. Released last month, a chill, colder than any Alaskan winter, ran down my spine. This explained everything. Her privacy, her choice of the isolated house, her desperate need for a new deadbolt. She was terrified. She was running, just like me, but from a tangible threat. A man, not a spectral abomination from another dimension, not the whispering dead, but a flesh and blood monster. It almost felt quaint. My shoulders relaxed, a fraction of the tension easing. This was a normal kind of horror, a human one. A few days later, my phone rang. Not a text this time, a call. My heart immediately went into overdrive. No good news ever comes via phone call in my line of work, especially not from a tenant who normally communicates via terse text messages. It was Emily. Her voice was thin, strained, laced with a barely suppressed hysteria. "I think someone's been in my house," she choked out, the words tumbling over each other. While I was at work, I can't explain it. Things just feel off. She sounded genuinely panicked, her composed facade finally cracking. The cynical part of me wanted to say, "Welcome to the club." The reluctant conscience, however, was already grabbing the keys. "I'm on my way," I said, the words of familiar, grim resignation. When I arrived, she was pacing the driveway, a pale wraith in the gathering dusk, her shoulders hunched against an invisible weight. Her eyes, usually so composed, darted nervously around the perimeter of the house like a cornered animal. She launched into a breathless explanation. "It's just little things. The couch pillows, they were arranged differently. My toothbrush, it was angled wrong in the holder. Nothing's missing, nothing's broken, but I know." Her voice rose on the last word, conviction warring with terror. I scanned the property, the woods pressed in, dark and silent, offering a million places for someone to hide, to watch. I checked the locks, one by one. The front door, the back door, all the windows. Each one secure, latched tight, no signs of forced entry, nothing out of place, no muddy footprints, no scuff marks on the sills. The only thing out of place was Emily herself, her agitated presence disrupting the otherwise pristine order of the driveway. I told her it was probably her imagination, the lingering trauma of her past attack playing tricks on her mind. I offered the standard landlord platitudes, empty reassurances that tasted like ash in my mouth. She nodded, but her eyes held a desperate, unconvinced flicker. Before I left, she asked if I'd install a second deadbolt on the front door. "Absolutely," I said, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. "First thing tomorrow." A part of me wanted to tell her to just get out, to cut her losses and disappear. But then, where would she go? I knew the feeling. There was nowhere to run, That was 2 nights ago. This morning, I was halfway through my lukewarm coffee, contemplating the dreary prospect of installing a new deadbolt, when my phone rang again. This time, it was the police. My stomach dropped. "There's been an incident at the property on Aspen Lane," the officer's voice said, crisp and unfeeling. "We need the landlord to come down." The drive there was a blur. My hands clenched the steering wheel, knuckles white. The police cars were already there, their lights strobing through the pre-dawn gloom, painting the quiet residential street in violent reds and blues. Officers swarmed the house, a hive of activity. Yellow crime scene tape, a garish ribbon against the gray wood. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Not again, I thought, a desperate, futile prayer. Please, not again. One of them, a burly cop with a tired face, peeled away from the cordon and walked towards me. "You the landlord?" he asked, his voice flat. I nodded, my throat dry, every muscle in my body tensing. He didn't waste words. "We found a body," he said, his gaze unwavering. "In the crawl space under the house." The world tilted. My mind reeled, trying to process the information, to fit it into the neat, terrible narrative I'd constructed. "A body?" I managed, my voice a croak. "Who?" He hesitated, a fleeting flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "A man. We're still identifying him, but it looks like he's been there a while." "A while?" The words echoed in the chill air, taking on a sinister weight. How long exactly was a while? My mind raced, flashing back to Emily's spotless house, the almost clinical cleanliness, her unsettling composure, her sudden, manufactured panic, the desperate request for a second deadbolt, the hair in the drain, the smell, my nightmare. Oh God, the nightmare. The mangled figure slowly pulling itself from the drain, its skin like a wet bedsheet. Was that what it had been? A premonition? Or a memory from her past? A glimpse into her grim process? The pieces of a puzzle, long scattered, were starting to click into place, forming a picture far more terrifying than anything I'd imagined. And then I saw her, Emily, sitting in the back of a police cruiser, a dark silhouette against the flashing lights. She looked calm, too calm. Her hands rested neatly in her lap, her head tilted slightly, almost artfully, as if she were listening to some far-off, unheard melody. No tears, no shock, no fear, just that serene, unsettling stillness. The kind of stillness you find in a predator, waiting. My feet moved on their own, drawing me closer, a moth to a deadly flame. As I approached, she turned her head slowly, deliberately, and looked at me. Her expression didn't change, not a muscle twitched, but her eyes, those dark, unblinking eyes, they pierced right through me, cold and ancient, devoid of all human warmth, like chips of obsidian. The same eyes from my nightmare, unblinking, unfeeling. And then, with a jolt that felt like a physical blow, I remembered the article, not just the headline, not the superficial details I'd skimmed, but the photo, the one I'd dismissed as a generic stock image. Emily, 6 years ago, sitting on the front steps of her old apartment building, her face pale and tear-streaked, and behind her, barely visible, officers were wheeling out a stretcher with a man on it. I'd assumed, in my haste, in my comfortable, self-serving narrative, that he was the intruder, the attacker, the monster, the one who had terrorized her. But the article hadn't said that. I had superimposed my own interpretation onto it, a convenient filter to make sense of the chaos. I had been too tired, too ready to categorize her as a victim, to truly read her. Looking back now, the headline itself, if I stripped away my own preconceived notions, sounded off, a chillingly polite deception. My gaze locked with hers through the glass of the cruiser. She didn't look away. Her lips parted just slightly, a faint, almost imperceptible curve, like she was about to speak, but she didn't have to. The words of the original article, now reread in my mind's eye, echoed with a new, horrifying clarity. A 19-year-old man was found in a crawl space inside of his own home after a supposed home invasion. Emily Rivers, a local dentist, was arrested on suspicion of murder and arrested for breaking and entering. Breaking and entering, not as a victim, as the perpetrator. The pieces slammed together, forming a horrifying mosaic. The immaculate house, the absent husband, the hair in the drain, the sickly sweet smell of decay, the fabricated fear, the second deadbolt, a final chilling touch, sealing her trophy inside. She wasn't the victim of a home invasion, she was the invasion, and the perfect tenant was just the perfect hunter. My old analog watch felt heavy on my wrist, a dead weight, another one, another body, another ghost to add to the growing legion rattling around inside my head. The wind picked up, a mournful howl, carrying with it the scent of death and the terrifying echo of a serene, unblinking gaze. I had to get out of here, before I became the next perfect tenant. The first thing I felt was the cold, not the dry, sterile chill of the apartment's air conditioning, but something ancient and wet, like the breath of a tomb exhaling in the darkness. It seeped into the worn leather of my jacket, through my thin sleep shirt, and settled deep in my bones. My eyes snapped open, but the room was a canvas of impenetrable black. Then came the sound, a low, grating rasp, like something dragging sharpened claws across stone, or perhaps in the oppressive silence of our shared bedroom. Something far more delicate, like fingernails tracing a fresh grave. It wasn't the familiar scurry of rats. This was too deliberate, too present. My hands slick with a sudden, cold sweat, instinctively went to the battered face of my analog wristwatch. Not to check the time, what was time to this, but for the grounding weight of it, the simple, mechanical truth in a world that had long since forgotten such luxuries. The luminous hands glowed 3:07 a.m., always 3 a.m. The witching hour, the hour when the veil thinned, when whatever dark currents pulled me into their orbit decided it was time to collect. I bit back a curse, tasting bile. Just another Tuesday. The scratching intensified, a rhythmic scrape coming from the wall directly behind Shane's bed. My breath hitched. Shane. I couldn't see him, but the darkness in the room felt thicker around his side. I pushed myself back against the headboard, feeling the cheap plaster dig into my spine, and strained my eyes, trying to pierce the gloom. Was he awake? Was he making the noise? The thought was a chilling one, given how he'd been acting. A new kind of noise now. A faint, wet snicking sound, like a dog lapping water, but too slow, too heavy, too deliberate. Then, a sudden, blinding flash. Not a light, but an absence of light. A momentary implosion of photons. And in that vacuum, I saw him. Shane. He wasn't just sitting up. He was ramrod straight, feet planted on the floor, his entire posture radiating an unnatural stillness that screamed wrongness, and his face, bathed in the sickly green glow of the digital alarm clock on his nightstand. His face was a mask of pure malevolence. A grin, wide and utterly alien, stretched his lips, showing too much gum, too many teeth. His eyes, twin pits of obsidian, fixed on me, piercing the darkness of the room, piercing me. A cold, crushing weight settled on my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. The temperature in the room plummeted, and I could practically feel the tendrils of fear coiling in my gut, a familiar, unwelcome serpent. This wasn't my brother. "What the hell are you doing, man?" I croaked, my voice a pathetic whisper against the crushing presence that filled the room. The air was thick, suffocating, as if every particle had turned to lead. It pressed against my eardrums, buzzed behind my eyes. Breathing became a conscious, desperate effort. Still, he didn't reply, just watched. That terrible, knowing grin plastered across his face. Then, movement. Behind Shane, on the wall, a shadow began to crawl. It wasn't the shifting shadow cast by a streetlight or a passing car. This was a living thing, detaching itself from the fabric of the room. It flowed and writhed, coalescing into something vaguely humanoid, but elongated, distorted, and it had eyes. Two pinpricks of furious, baleful red light gleaming from the amorphous mass. Long, spindly fingers, ending in needle-sharp tips, stretched and contracted, scratching the plaster with that same dreadful sound I'd heard before. Those were the gouges. My blood ran cold, colder than the tomb breath that still swirled around me. This wasn't a dream. This was another chapter in the endless, cursed book of my life. Shane's mouth opened, not a smile anymore, but a cavernous, black maw, and from it, a voice emerged. No, voices. A chorus, a cacophony of scraping, guttural whispers and sharp, sibilant hisses, all layered beneath a chilling imitation of Shane's own voice, distorted and stretched like a broken tape. Shh, go back to sleep, little brother. The words were an order, an incision. There was no love behind them, no warmth, no flicker of the brother who had raised me, only pure, undiluted malice, pure evil. My eyelids sagged instantly, heavy as lead, my body betrayed by my own consciousness, betrayed by him, sank back onto the mattress. I tried to fight it, clawing at the edges of the encroaching darkness, but the exhaustion was an insurmountable wave. The last thing I saw before the blackness swallowed me whole were those twin red pinpricks of light in the shadow, in Shane's malevolent grin, burning itself into the inside of my eyelids. It started, as these things always do for me, with a phone call. Most of the horrors I'd stumbled into, the whispering dead on snow-choked mountain passes, the skin suit lady with a smile like a shattered mirror, the crawling thing in the walls that smelled like old plaster, and despair. They never bothered with introductions. They just were. But this one, this new layer of my own personal hell, began with the tinny ring of a cheap burner phone and the voice of my brother, Shane. They're letting me out. Leo, he'd said, his voice crackling with an almost unholy excitement that had immediately set my teeth on edge. Shane, my older brother, had been a guest of the state for the past decade, 30 years to life, accessory to murder. He was a good man, or at least he had been, trapped in a shitty situation by his own desperate, misguided attempts to give us a life. But good didn't cut it in the legal system, especially not when the victim was a cop. My hand, even then, had gone to my wrist, my thumb tracing the cold steel of my watch. A nervous tick I'd picked up somewhere along the desolate highways of my existence. It usually meant I was about to hear something I didn't want to. Early release program, he'd rushed on, barely taking a breath. They call it ethical alteration. Says it removes your criminal tendencies. 10 minutes. Leo, 10 minutes and I'm out. We can get our lives back. My gut twisted. Ethical alteration. Even the words tasted like cheap disinfectant and institutional lies. I'd heard enough hollow promises in my life to know a trap when it wore a pretty name. What's the catch, Shane? You sound like a damn infomercial. He'd laughed. A real laugh. One of the last I'd hear from him for a long time. No catch, just a quick procedure. Says it's cutting-edge science. Non-invasive, no drugs, no surgery. Probably just strap me to a chair, zap my brain a little. But hey, I never had any real criminal tendencies anyway, right? Oh, Shane, always so optimistic, so utterly blind to the true darkness of the world. My throat tightened. He was right about one thing. He wasn't a criminal, not in the way they meant. He was a kid who'd been dealt a rotten hand and tried to fold it into something decent. Our mother, God bless her, was a force of nature, a Category 5 hurricane of bad choices and worse men. She'd gotten pregnant with Shane at 16, kicked out, then landed with his deadbeat father who worked her raw, beat her, and then tossed her when she was pregnant with me. Shane was 12 when I arrived, a scrawny kid who'd already seen more than enough of the ugly side of life. But he'd looked at me, this tiny, helpless thing, and something in him had clicked. He became my father, my protector. He changed my diapers, figured out how to stretch $1 until Lincoln screamed, cooked me burnt toast and lumpy eggs, and held my hand on the way to school. While Mom drifted deeper into her drug-fueled haze, Shane worked. Bootleg candy from his locker, a mechanic job after school, picking up anything he could to squirrel away money. His dream wasn't for himself, it was for me, for us. A small house in the suburbs, a life where I didn't have to watch my back every time I walked down the street. In college. He wanted me to go to college, to do something important. That phrase, do something important, became his mantra, a heavy, unspoken burden he laid on my shoulders, a burden I'd never quite managed to shake. He'd even sobered Mom up a little, just by being so damn capable. She started waiting for me after school, made dinner sometimes. It was a fragile piece, bought with Shane's sweat and sacrificed youth. And then, at 14, everything came crashing down. Shane, ever chasing that extra buck for our future fun, had taken a side gig from his boss, Mr. Franks, driving packages, not asking questions. Then one night, it was a person, a friend of Frank's, to be dropped off, waited for, and returned. Shane drove, oblivious, a rural house, gunshots. Shane, bless his naive heart, tried to leave, but the man, shot and bleeding, had clawed his way into the passenger seat, screaming at Shane to drive. Shane, seeing no other option, seeing only the money that would finally get us out of that rat-infested apartment, had driven the dying hitman to the nearest hospital, laid him on a gurney, and watched his future evaporate. The man had been an executioner. The house belonged to a detective investigating Franks. The detective and his wife were dead. The wife, bless her, had managed a 911 call before she expired. The police were on high alert. Shane, in shock, tried to explain, tried to lie, but the dead man on the gurney and the dead detective were all the evidence they needed. Franks, the snake, blamed Shane, twisting his desperation into malice, accessory to murder. 30 years. We blew every dime we had, every penny Shane had ever saved for my college, on a defense that went nowhere. The court wanted a pound of flesh, and Shane was the easiest target. I visited him religiously, every few weeks, making the long, dreary drive to the state penitentiary. The walls like something out of a bad dream, smelling of stale fear and industrial cleaner. He'd try to hide it, but the marks of prison life were etched on him. The gauntness, the bruises, the way his smile, once so bright, had thinned at the edges. Still, he kept that maddening optimism. Better times are just around the corner. Leo, we'll figure it out. So when he called about the ethical alteration, it was tinged with that same desperate, hopeful naivety. It's an opportunity for us, Leo. 10 minutes, and I'm back. We can save again. You'll go to college. He hadn't called for my opinion. He'd called to tell me it was already done. The line went dead. A week passed, then another, then a third. The prison, when I called, gave me the runaround. Sick, infirmary, flu, then with a chilling nonchalance. No early release program here, sir. You must have been mistaken. My number ended up blocked. The pit in my stomach grew into a gaping chasm. I knew something was wrong. Shane never went silent. Never. Just as I was about to write a letter to anyone with a pulse in government, my phone rang. Not Shane. A curt, impersonal voice from the prison. "You can pick up Mr. Thompson tomorrow at noon. He's being released on parole." No questions, no explanations. Just a stark, clinical command. My mother, for the first time in years, actually ironed a dress. Her hands shook so badly she looked like she was wrestling a ghost, but the effort was there. She even managed a few sentences that weren't a complaint or a drunken ramble. "He's coming home. Leo, everything will be okay now." I just nodded, a knot of dread tightening in my chest. What had they done to him? What had convinced them a man jailed for accessory to murder was suddenly no longer a threat? The ethical alteration had stopped sounding like a bad joke and started sounding like something straight out of a particularly nasty nightmare. The prison waiting room was a sterile, unforgiving space. Fluorescent lights buzzed like angry wasps, casting a sickly yellow glow on the institutional gray walls. The air smelled of disinfectant and hopelessness. I checked my watch again. Noon? Right on time. A door hissed open, and Shane emerged, flanked by two burly guards. My heart leaped, then dropped like a stone. He was different. The smile that had been his constant companion, even in the grim halls of incarceration, was gone. All the life, the animation, the sheer Shaneness of him had been meticulously scraped away. His face was vacant, his eyes staring into the middle distance as if the world in front of him was just a blurry, unimportant canvas. "Shane!" "Oh," I called, my voice thick with a desperate hope. He turned slowly, mechanically, like a poorly programmed automaton. It was a physical reaction to the sound of his name, not the recognition of his brother's voice. I rushed forward, pulled him into a desperate hug, burying my face in the collar of his prison-issued jumpsuit. "Shane, are you okay? I'm so happy to see you. You're free." His arms hung stiffly at his sides, unmoving. Shane, the man who had hugged me like a bear, who would always scoop me up in a crushing embrace, gave me nothing. Not a squeeze, not a pat on the back, not even a twitch of a muscle. I pulled back, my throat suddenly dry. "Shane, what the hell? Are you okay? What did they do to you?" I asked, shaking his shoulders gently. Then harder, a frantic tremor running through my own body. His voice, and when it came, was flat, devoid of inflection, like a GPS instructing you to turn left. "I feel okay," was the hollow echo of a voice, not the rich, warm baritone I remembered. I wanted to scream, to grab the guards by their collars and demand answers. Just then, a woman glided into the sterile waiting room. Thin, sharp, dressed in an immaculate lab coat, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes, behind rimless glasses, held a predatory, almost gleeful glint. Dr. Kochik, head of the program. She introduced herself, her voice a condescending purr. "Are you Shane's brother? He listed you as his post-release guardian?" "Yeah, I am," I snapped, my eyes blazing. "What the fuck did you do to him?" She didn't flinch, just regarded me with an almost scientific disinterest, as if I were a particularly noisy specimen. "Your brother is one of the first individuals to undergo a revolutionary new process. It will fundamentally change the landscape of criminal justice in this country. No longer will we need to incarcerate indefinitely. We'll simply provide the alteration." "You should be proud of him." Her tone dripped with an infuriating superiority. "That's not my brother," I roared, pointing a trembling finger at Shane, who stood perfectly still, a blank mannequin. Shane never stood still for more than 10 seconds in his life. "Look at him!" He turned his head slightly when I said his name, his eyes finding me. Then Dr. Kochik, then drifting back to the empty wall. No spark, no recognition. "You need to lower your voice," she said, a flicker of annoyance in her otherwise composed expression. I understand the initial effects may be shocking, but in time, you'll see he is better this way. Your brother committed a heinous crime. The effects, in any case, are irreversible. We need to discuss the path forward. Irreversible? The word tasted like ash. You don't know shit about him. He was innocent. He was a good man. Change him back. I don't care if he sits in here for the rest of his life. At least he'd be himself. My voice was hoarse, ragged. She was already ticking items off on a clipboard, barely listening. Again, the process is irreversible. Your brother signed a binding agreement to participate. He's been evaluated. Everyone is on board with phase 2, public reintroduction. You have 2 options. Option 1, sign this. Take your brother home. Daily calls to me, periodic home visits. We'll help him secure employment. You will disclose nothing about this process. Any violation, he returns here. You lose all future visitation. She paused, her eyes, cold and assessing, met mine. Option 2, you don't sign. We take your brother back inside now, and you also lose all future visitation privileges. And before you start spouting off about legality or suing us, she allowed herself a small, knowing smirk. We have backing from the highest levels. Your case would go nowhere. Now, if you could hurry, please. I have several more of these to do today. Rage, pure and blinding, surged through me. So hot it nearly choked me. She was right. She held all the cards. Shane was a variable, a case study, a note on her clipboard. Not a person, but if I refused, he'd be swallowed by this place, left to rot, a blank shell in a concrete box. This blank shell was all I had left of him. It was all he had left. With a tremor, I snatched the clipboard from her manicured hand and scrawled my signature. My name a furious blur. The bitter taste of defeat was sharper than any fear I'd ever known. The drive home was a mausoleum of silence. My mother wept quietly in the passenger seat, her brief hope dissolving into the familiar despair. I tried, once or twice, to ask Shane something. Anything. How was it, Shane? What do you remember? I don't remember, he responded, each word a flat, toneless declaration, an unthinking echo, like a speaker testing its output. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. Was he even still in there? Did he know who I was? Who he was? I am tired. I need sleep. The words came out of him abruptly, without preamble, the same hollow, synthesized voice. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see glowing red eyes, a glint of chrome beneath the skin. But he was already slumped against the window, breathing slow and even, perfectly, unnervingly asleep, just like that. Need sleep, go to sleep, like hitting a switch. The thought of him being some kind of cyborg, some mechanical construct, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. My worn leather jacket felt like a straitjacket, binding me, trapping me. I needed answers. As soon as we were through the door, I'd take the metal detecting wand I kept from an old security gig and scan him. Every inch. He was still snoring softly when I parked the car outside our apartment building, the familiar grime and cracked asphalt doing little to ground me. I opened the back door, shook his shoulder gently. Usually, waking him was an act of tactical warfare, a grumpy struggle for 5 more minutes of oblivion. I braced myself, but he just opened his eyes, blinked once, and stared straight ahead. Blank. Shane, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Hey, we're home. You can get out now. We can go inside. He just stared. I tried to sound patient. It's okay, man. We're home. Okay. The word was like a stone dropping into a still pond. No ripple of emotion, no current of recognition. It wasn't his voice. It was his vocal cords producing the sound. Yes, but the cadence, the inflection, the very quality of it. It was utterly alien. For 24 years, I'd known that voice. This was a crude imitation. Mom was already halfway up the stairs, a stumbling, weeping shadow. I knew she was heading for the bottle. She'd been good to me for years, after Shane had shocked her back into some semblance of motherhood. But now, without his guiding hand, she was gone, another casualty. Shane exited the car, his movements precise, unthinking. He walked directly to the elevator, hit the up button, and once inside, pressed the correct floor. When we got off, he made a beeline for our apartment door, unlocked it with the key I'd given him, and stepped through the threshold. Then, he stopped dead, stock still, like a paused video. I nearly collided with him. He seemed to be waiting for the next command. "Go sit at the kitchen table for now," I said, my voice shaking with an exhaustion that went deeper than sleep. "Okay," the dead voice again. I grabbed the metal detector, a flimsy plastic thing with a cheap buzzing sound, and ran it over him. His head, his chest, his limbs. Nothing. Not a single ping. I checked for scars, for stitches, for any sign of surgical invasion. His skin was smooth, unmarked. To my untrained eye, he was utterly, unnervingly pristine. He endured my frantic examination without a flicker of emotion, his blank stare fixed on the wall. I could have flayed him, and he wouldn't have reacted. The thought was chilling. I sat down opposite him at the kitchen table, the cheap formica cold beneath my forearms. His eyes met mine, but it was like looking into a pair of perfectly crafted glass spheres. There was no light there, no depth, no him. Whatever essence had made Shane was gone. I was staring at an empty vessel, a collection of cells that could walk and talk, but lacked a soul. It terrified me more than any monster I'd ever encountered, because this wasn't a monster. This was my brother's body. My voice quivered. "Shane, do you remember your full name?" "Yes." "What is it?" "Shane Theodore Thompson." A recall of data, like pulling a file from a corrupted hard drive. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes." "Who am I to you?" "What is my full name?" "You are my brother, Leo Francis Thompson." A sliver of desperate hope, quickly snuffed out. This was all information they could have programmed into him, memory dumped from his prison file. I needed something more, something personal, something only he would know. "Who did you lose your virginity to, and where did it happen?" The question felt crude, invasive, but I was desperate. Elise Sherman, in her parents' basement. The answer was immediate, devoid of hesitation. That memory, Shane and I had laughed about it 100 times. Elise's dad, a red-faced brute, storming down the stairs, catching them mid-act, chasing a pants around his ankles Shane out into the street in front of half the neighborhood. It was the stuff of legend, a story that always sent Shane into fits of howling laughter, his face turning beet red with embarrassment and mirth. But now, as he relayed the information, there was no humor, no flicker of a smile, no hint of the shared memory. The data was there, accessible, but disconnected from any emotion, any personal experience. He was a memory bank, not a person. They hadn't removed his criminal tendencies. They had removed him. His soul, his essence, whatever made him unique, had been ripped out, leaving behind a perfectly functional, soulless shell. My brother had died somewhere in that sterile prison, in that 10-minute procedure. For the next several weeks, I kept my end of the bargain. Called Dr. Kochik daily, gave her updates on Shane. There was nothing to report. He went to the grocery store job they'd secured for him, performing tasks perfectly, but without initiative. He ate when hungry, drank when thirsty, slept when tired. Otherwise, he just sat, blank and still, waiting for instructions. A human puppet. Dr. Kochik, for her part, was delighted. She called it a success. I called it a desecration, Shane, my vibrant, cynical, loving brother, was gone. And I, Leo Vance, the weary wanderer, was left to care for his empty husk. It was a grim, thankless burden, but it was Shane. He had sacrificed everything for me. Now, it was my turn. I would support him, this thing that wore his face, until the day one of us finally broke or died. Then, last week, everything changed. I woke around 3 REM, the familiar scratching noise pulling me from the murky depths of a stress-induced sleep. It was louder this time, more insistent, coming from the wall by Shane's bed. I rolled over, rubbing the grit from my eyes. Rats, maybe, or just my imagination. I was exhausted, bone-deep tired from the constant vigilance, the slow, agonizing grief for a brother who was still breathing, but no longer living. I closed my eyes, willing myself back to sleep. The scratching persisted. I swore under my breath. Too tired to care, I buried my head in my pillow. It would wait until morning. The next morning, however, arrived with a jolt. Not from the buzzing of my alarm, but from the impossible, intoxicating smell of bacon, crispy, sizzling, undeniably real bacon. My eyes snapped open, a jolt of pure confusion running through me. Mom hadn't cooked breakfast in years, not since Shane went away. And Shane, the altered Shane, couldn't even scramble an egg without step-by-step instructions. I rolled over. Shane's bed was empty. My heart hammered against my ribs. Since his return, I'd had to verbally drag him out of bed every single morning. He'd never gotten up on his own. What was happening? Then I heard it. Laughter. Shane's laughter. Rich, booming, utterly familiar. It drifted from the kitchen, mingled with my mother's lighter, almost girlish giggle, and then her voice, clear and vibrant. "Speak of the devil. Leo's awake." My name. They were talking about me, bleary-eyed. I stumbled into the kitchen. Shane was at the stove, spatula in hand, a plume of bacon smoke curling around him. He turned, a wide, genuine smile splitting his face, his eyes sparkling with an animation I hadn't seen in a decade. "Morning, little brother," he boomed, abandoning the bacon to rush at me, wrapping me in a bone-crushing hug. He actually squeezed. My arms, stiff with shock, barely managed to return the embrace. "We were just talking about the time you tried to bake me a birthday cake and mixed up the salt and the sugar." He pulled back, his laugh filling the small apartment, a sound I thought I'd never hear again. I was speechless. This was him. This was Shane. The genuine article. My mind raced, frantically searching for an explanation. Had the alteration worn off? Was this some delayed recovery? A miracle? I reached up, cupped his face in my hands, forcing him to meet my gaze. I stared deep into his eyes, searching for the emptiness. And there it was. Life, warmth, humor, all of Shane, shining back at me. But beneath it, lurking just at the edges of the irises, was something else. A flicker of something cold, something ancient, something unspeakably dark. A sudden, almost imperceptible flash of black, like ink blooming in clear water. I gasped, stumbling backward, tripping over my own feet. Shane laughed again, a slight edge to it now. "What's the matter, Leo? Still shocked at how much better looking I am than you?" He winked, then turned back to the sizzling bacon. "Must have been a trick of the light." "A trick of the light," I repeated, the words a hollow echo in my own mind. I wanted to believe it. God, I wanted to believe it so badly and just be happy. "Leo, be happy he's back. Maybe the effects just lessened. Maybe they wore off. Maybe..." But the coldness in his laughter, the subtle shift in his eyes, refused to be dismissed. It was there, a thin, sharp blade beneath the warmth of his returned personality. Still, we had breakfast. The best family breakfast since I was 14. and he'd been dragged away. We talked, we laughed, we reminisced. I almost cried. The sheer, overwhelming joy of having my brother truly back, battling with that insidious dread. After he left for work, I picked up the phone. Dr. Kochik, I debated telling her. Shane's change was good, right? But something in her tone when she'd first described the irreversible alteration made me hesitate. Maybe she wouldn't see it as a good thing. Maybe she'd want to take him back. Fix him again. The phone rang twice. Is he acting differently today? She asked, her voice tight, anxious, before I could even get a word in. My blood ran cold. She knew. She expected it. Yeah, I stammered, my heart thudding. Yeah, he was like his old self. Cooked breakfast? Everything. Did you notice anything strange about him? Her voice was barely a whisper now. Urgent, frayed. Nothing serious. I lied, the words catching in my throat. Just his eyes looked different. What's going on? Doctor. Shit, she breathed, a raw, unprofessional expletive. Just hang tight. I'll come out and check on him tomorrow. And then, a click. She hung up. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. She knew. She'd been expecting it. All day. I tried to act normal. Went to work, though my hands shook on the steering wheel of my truck, and the hum of the engine did little to drown out the frantic questions in my head. Would he be different tonight? Would he be the empty shell again? Or something worse? When he returned, the dread momentarily receded. He walked in, laden with grocery bags, a triumphant grin on his face. 5-star meal tonight, little brother, he announced, already heading for the kitchen. His presence, his laughter, his familiar energy pushed back the cold fear. Maybe Dr. Kochik was just a paranoid hack. Maybe whatever she did had simply worn off, leaving Shane whole again. Maybe this was the miracle I'd secretly yearned for. If this was it, I decided, if this was my last night with my true brother before they dragged him back to that desolate place, I would savor every moment. We ate, we drank, we laughed until our sides ached, sang old songs off-key. It was a perfect night, the kind of perfect night that only happens before something truly terrible rears its head. Then, we fell asleep. I woke again around 3 or so a.m. The scratching had returned, louder this time, a furious, tearing sound coming from the wall directly behind Shane's bed. My eyes shot open. The cold, wet dread was back, a suffocating blanket. I pulled myself upright, scrambling backward, pressing myself into the cheap plaster of the headboard. "What the fuck?" I yelled, but the words were a useless puff of air. Shane was sitting bolt upright in his bed, just as before, feet on the floor, but the malevolent grin was wider now, a grotesque rictus illuminated by the sickly green glow of the digital clock. His eyes, in that faint light, were not the glass eyes of the altered Shane, nor the vibrant eyes of the returned Shane. They were black, truly black, like endless wells of obsidian, and I felt as if I was falling into them. "What the hell are you doing, man?" I yelped, my voice cracking. The air in the room was not just thick, it was oppressive, a physical weight on my chest, pressing me down. Breathing was a struggle, each gasp shallow and desperate. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. He didn't reply, just watched. His eyes were cold, utterly devoid of warmth or recognition. And then, movement. Behind him, on the wall, the shadow. It writhed, expanded, its outline sharpening in the gloom. It was larger now, more defined, a hulking, skeletal thing with long, spindly fingers tipped with needle-sharp claws that gouged deep furrows in the wall, exposing the rough lath beneath. And those eyes, two furious, burning red coals. fixed on me. They weren't just gleaming, they burned, searing themselves into my retinas. Shane's mouth opened wider, impossibly wide, a black, cavernous maw, and from it, a horrifying symphony of sound erupted. Not his voice, not even an imitation. A chorus of voices layered over each other. A guttural growl, a sibilant whisper, a keening wail, and a thin, high-pitched shriek, all culminating in a chilling, melodic hum that vibrated in my teeth. But beneath it all, barely discernible, was the echo of Shane's own voice, twisted and broken, like a trapped bird beating its wings against iron bars. Shh, go back to sleep, little brother. The words weren't a suggestion. They were a command, a malevolent will wrapped around my consciousness, squeezing the fight out of me. My eyelids sagged, my limbs went heavy, leaden. I fought it, desperately. My mind screamed, "No, don't go to sleep. This isn't a dream." But the exhaustion, the terror, the sheer, crushing evil emanating from the thing that wore my brother's face overwhelmed me. My body betrayed me. I collapsed back onto the bed, the blackness swirling, pulling me down into a sleep deeper and more terrifying than any death. I didn't wake until noon the next day. The sun, a pale, indifferent orb, streamed through the grimy windows of our apartment. My manager had left 6 missed calls and a flurry of texts, all demanding to know why I hadn't shown up for my shift. The world outside, oblivious and mundane, went on, but my world had shifted irrevocably. The events of the night before replayed in my mind, a horrifying loop of sound and shadow. I tried to dismiss it, to tell myself it was a dream, a nightmare born of exhaustion and grief. But when I looked over at Shane's bed, the raw, undeniable evidence stared back at me. Deep, jagged gouges, 3 of them, parallel and distinct, scoring the wall behind his headboard. They looked like they'd been made by massive, clawed hands, the kind of claws a shadow with burning red eyes might possess. A cold, horrifying realization clicked into place. My blood ran colder than the tomb breath from the night. They hadn't just removed his criminal tendencies. They hadn't just removed his memories or his personality. They had removed his soul, the very essence that made Shane, Shane. Ripped it clean out, leaving an empty, perfectly functional vessel, and they left it open for something else to inhabit. Dr. Kochik never showed up for her promised visit. My calls went straight to voicemail. When I contacted the prison directly, their voices were calm, infuriatingly polite. "A Dr. Kochik has never worked here, sir, and there's no record of a Shane Theodore Thompson ever serving time at this facility." They had abandoned us. They were covering it up. "He's getting worse. The scratching is more frequent now, not just at night." I hear his voice, not just the alien drone, but the chorus of other voices, speaking languages I don't recognize, ancient, guttural sounds that claw at the edges of my sanity. Sometimes, when he thinks I'm not looking, I see small objects floating, hovering in the air. A teacup, a spoon. He doesn't even seem to notice, or maybe he does. I don't know how they did it, if it was some twisted science or ancient magic, but I know what they did, and I know it's not just Shane. How many others went through the process? How many others were ethically altered? How many empty vessels did they create, waiting to be filled? They didn't consider that if they removed the souls that inhabited these people, they left them open to be inhabited by something else. And now, I live with that something else, every day, waiting for it to turn its black, empty eyes on me and truly begin. Character count: 9,873 characters.